G'day, mate. 40 here. It's hard to go on the platform X today without hearing about Lily Phillips. And she is in a new YouTube documentary, I Slept with 100 Men in One Day. And the New York Post has an article on her headline. OnlyFans model cries after sleeping with 101 men in a day. Sometimes I feel so robotic. Lily Phillips, 23, and she went to university in England. She has a working class accent. She's an attractive young woman and intelligent. I would reckon she's as intelligent as I am. She had sex with over 100 men in a day back in October to create scandalous content for her OnlyFans. But despite previously insisting that she enjoyed the extreme stunt, all that sex didn't make her feel good. Sometimes I feel so robotic, she admits in this new documentary. British sex worker fought back tears as she recalled that day. I think by the 30th, when we're getting on a bit, I've got a routine of how we're going to do this, and sometimes you disassociate, and it's not like normal sex at all. I remember the first time I had sex with porn star Kendra Jade. She said to me, Lukey, you know how porn stars all deny that they were molested as kids? Well, we're all lying. She said that I was molested as a kid, and when I have sex, I disassociate. I float above my body. I'm up there on the ceiling kind of looking down on what's happening. So Phillips says she doesn't remember much about what happened. She says it's not just the physical intimacy of having sex with so many men that made her feel bad, but it was because she disappointed the men by not being able to talk with them or even appearing interested in talking to them. She said the conversation was hard. She recalled how one man complained that they only chatted for about 2 minutes when she said beforehand they would talk for 5 minutes. She felt like she disappointed her supporters. Now, she earns in the millions of dollars per month from her OnlyFans. When you promise something to people who support you, it's hard to let them down. She admitted she hadn't yet processed what she did on that day, but she said she wouldn't forget the day of her emotional interview, and also she now plans to have sex with 1,000 men in a day. So I wrote about the porn industry from 1995 to 2007, and I found that experience retarded my thinking, right? The more time I spent around porn, the dumber I got. Friends would say to me, I remember when you were smart. And other people noted how I became more coarse and more socially inappropriate and more hardened the more time I spent around porners. So there probably are many revelations from having sex with 100 men in one day. And there are probably many forms of knowledge that are just not good for most people. As I've gotten older, I've come around to the idea that there's forbidden knowledge or knowledge that most people would be better off not knowing about. For example, most people would be better off not knowing about the past sex life of their spouse. And on that theme, when I think about it, the most happily married people that I think I know, they all seem to have positively distorted views of their spouse, right? They seem to see their spouse through a rose-colored lens. So, open question, is it possible to love someone and to see them as they are and to not see them through rose-colored glasses? And are there any examples from history of pornography serving as a stimulus to great intellectual or artistic achievement? I can't think of examples. And let's be positive. What would be the best way for Lily Phillips, after starring in a 100-man gangbang video, to leverage that achievement towards success in polite society? Right? She has a phenomenal ability to disassociate. I'm thinking it might help her to become a great spy or perhaps a great shock jock. She's fairly articulate. Now, she's a beautiful woman. She's smart. She's got good manners. Open question. Would you be proud to introduce this woman to your family and friends as your future bride? So I would not enjoy introducing my future bride to when there are a whole bunch of men in my community who'd taken her for a ride, right? That wouldn't make me feel like I really got someone special. So I was able to have sex with porn stars often after they'd retired, and I even dated one after she retired. But the more we did intimate things, the more intimate feelings I grew for her. And then I felt horrible that she had been a porn star, and I may have thrown it in her face. So all sorts of things that you don't think are going to bother you when you start developing intense feelings for someone, they bother you. I remember I quite liked the writing of this beautiful young woman. It was snarky and hip and fun. And I sent her an email one day and met her. And we met for coffee. And then I took her for a walk on the beach. And I kissed her on the first date. And we went out on and off for a year. But the more intimate my feelings grew for her, the more intense my feelings grew about her writing, to the point where I didn't want to read her blog posts anymore. And it bothered me that many of my friends didn't think she was very smart. And so initially she was just beautiful. She was the most beautiful woman that I ever dated for a long time. And most of my male friends tried to have sex with her, right? That's how hot she was, right? When it came to weighing up their friendship with me versus the opportunity to have sex with this woman, it was no contest for most blokes that I know. So what's the subject topic for today's stream? I think it's that no one has the faintest idea how to prevent major mental illness. And I don't think that Lily Phillips, the OnlyFans star who had sex with over 100 men a day, I don't think she's mentally ill, right? In certain types of societies, she would be glorified and honored. And she is being glorified and honored, I guess, to a degree in this society. That we have societies where great sexual performers are put up on a pedestal. So I don't think she's mentally ill. Remember, I got this from Alan Horwitz, a sociologist who writes on the sociology of medicine. He made the point, how do you know if your wrist is healthy? If your wrist can do everything that you expect your wrist to do. My wrist can do everything that I expect my wrist to do. So how do you tell if you have a mental illness if your mind and your psyche are not able to do all the things that you would expect your mind and psyche to be able to do? Whether it's feeding back to you messages and sending you prompts that are generally aligned with your best interests on a normal basis. So everyone has some self-destructive tendencies. Right, failing the severely mentally ill.
How would you like to be on the subway with this man?
Down, dude. Look why you stood up. That's a threat.
Or this person?
Oh.
Or how would you have liked to have been in Denver the day this man terrorized people, swinging this pipe at them, hitting some? Later he said, I didn't mean to hurt anyone. He only did this in self-defense, he said, because he felt threatened.
He was paranoid and he thought these people had been attacking him.
DJ Jaffe gave up a successful advertising career to try to improve the way America deals with people like this man. In jail later, the man apologized. He said,
I'm sorry, and I didn't come here for nothing like that. If I was on my medication, I wouldn't have never done nothing.
Most of the disoriented and threatening people we see on the street are schizophrenics or people with bipolar disease who stop taking their medication. They cycle in and out of hospital emergency rooms.
Jimmy, get out of the way! Call 911 again.
And some are a danger to others.
We have one officer that's correct.
Russell Weston shot 2 guards at the Capitol because he knew there was a ruby red time reversal system in the basement, and if he could get to that, he could save the world.
The ruby time reverse system means that they are not permanently dead.
Could you just make them come alive by your choice?
Yes, I can do that, yes.
Weston wasn't taking his medication because he didn't believe he was sick.
Almost all these cases are individuals who are known to be seriously mentally ill and not treated. Russell Weston was one of them. So was John Hinckley, who shot President Reagan. John Hinckley shot Reagan because he knew, not thought, knew that was the best way to get a date with Jodie Foster.
Years ago, more mentally ill people were locked up in mental hospitals, asylums. That protected us from people like these, but the asylums were horrible places.
They were overcrowded, very shabby conditions. So we decided we would largely replace that system with a system in which people would receive mental health care in the...
So this is how public discourse and the news work. You point out all the problems with something, and you don't spend nearly as much time pointing out that alternatives to this shoddy thing that you've got going would be far, far worse. So deinstitutionalizing the severely mentally ill is far worse than keeping them in these shabby mental hospitals. And the news doesn't usually think past stage one. It's all about what's going on right here, right now with this particular institution or policy. And it usually doesn't take the time to contemplate what are the alternatives, and do we know that they're better than the shabby thing that we've got going on right now.
The community.
Made sense. They'd be closer to their family, perhaps, who could visit, be cheaper in the neighborhood. But that didn't happen.
Nope. The largest jail or prison is going to have a larger population of mentally ill people than the largest mental hospital.
Today, thousands of mentally ill people are locked up in Los Angeles County Jail, Cook County Jail, and Rikers Island in New York City.
You will find a much larger population of seriously mentally ill.
Right, yeah, we have 10 times more seriously mentally ill people in prison than we do in hospitals, because we're not putting the seriously mentally ill in the hospitals, in the institutions they deserve to be. So we end up having to keep them in prison.
People in those facilities than you will find in any mental hospital.
The guards are not trained in handling mentally ill people.
A jail or a prison is no place for somebody with schizophrenia. However, that's where they're going to remain.
As hospitals went down, incarceration went up. And in fact, in the 1960s, and you compare it today, there's virtually the same number of people institutionalized.
Just in jail instead of asylums.
Absolutely.
And in jails, they barely get treatment. And the mentally ill people in jails stay much longer.
And they get abused, and they get victimized, and they get thrown in solitary, and they can't visit their families. It's a horrific place to be.
There could be better alternatives. America has some high-quality mental hospitals. Bellevue in New York City is world famous. But Bellevue doesn't have enough money to give the extended treatment that most seriously ill people need.
It's become harder to get into Bellevue than Harvard. If you're well enough to walk into a hospital and ask for care, they're going to say you're not sick enough to need it.
If you are sick enough, as this man may be, hospitals often practice what Jaffe calls treating and streeting.
They discharge you sicker and quicker. It's basically treated and streeted is the new policy.
The police call it catch and release. Of course, there'd be more money for treatment of the repeat offenders.
It's not like this in Australia. I suspect that this problem is worse in the United States than any other prosperous nation of which I'm aware, in part because Americans venerate freedom, and you can take freedom too far, right? The severely mentally ill who are a threat to themselves and to other people, right? What they don't primarily need is freedom. What they primarily need is treatment, and they need to be restricted, right? They need to have some freedoms taken away. When I was in Sydney, when I was in Brisbane, when I'm in Australia, I didn't notice these problems. When I was in London, I didn't notice these problems. When I was in Paris, I didn't notice these problems at near the degree to which we have them in the United States. To restore quality of life to our major cities, we have to get the severely mentally ill, right, in institutions and kept there. And it can't be A-OK just to be homeless and on the street. We need a lot more criminals locked up, and we need a lot more mentally ill people behind bars, because it just destroys the quality of life in big cities. And how do people react? You react by becoming more callous, and you restrict your circle of moral concern to just a relatively small number of people, and you're much less likely to engage with strangers. You're much less likely to volunteer to help a wider community, right? You tend to close in and become like a turtle, and you'll go on the streets to do your job, to do your chores, but then you'll come home to watch TV because you just get so tired from the dangers of interacting with the mentally ill. The mentally ill are substantially more likely to hurt you than the non-mentally ill. And what is mental illness? All right, it's the same as the wrist. Does your wrist work? Yes, my wrist works. Does your mental health and your psyche work? So they are as aligned with your general well-being as next bloke, right? Then you don't have a serious mental illness. How do you prevent major mental illness? I just read this line earlier today. I thought, wow, I want to talk about this. And here is the author, Rael Jean Isaac. And she's the co-author of Madness in the Streets, How Psychiatry and the Law Abandon the Mentally Ill. And her comment comes in the opening pages as a plug for a book by DJ Jaffe, who's featured in this documentary we've been watching, Insane Consequences, How the Mental Health Industry Fails the Mentally Ill. And here's the killer quote: "No one has the faintest idea of how to prevent major mental illness." And I wanted to know what Alan Horwitz thought about this. And he agreed, though. He said in the future, maybe we'll learn about how to prevent major mental illness. I just started using Grok and AI for the first time today to summarize all sorts of books and ideas and essays that I've been reading. I was struggling yesterday trying to share with you some of the highlights of this superb Rony Guldmann essay in progress on the twin pathologies of COVID vaccine conspiracism and fat acceptance. But he's writing it in a very densely textured way where sentences are incredibly complicated. And so I got Grok to summarize his essay, and then I got Grok to summarize his book, Conservative Claims of Cultural Oppression. And then I got Grok to summarize a whole bunch of books that I want to read. And one of them was by Alan Horwitz back in 2001, Creating Mental Illness. So in this book, he said, only a small number of serious psychological conditions are real in terms of a disease, right? The rest are cultural constructions and normal reactions to difficult social circumstances or just deviant behavior. And in this book, Horwitz identifies all the financial incentives that urge therapists and drug companies to proliferate psychiatric diagnostic categories. So the psychiatric profession has a stranglehold on funding for mental health. So Grok says these are the key points of Alan Horowitz's book, Critique of the Disease Model. So he says that most of what we call mental illness is not a disease. Says that this disease model serves therapists, drug companies, and mental health advocacy groups. And the expansion of psychiatric diagnoses, why would mental health groups want to expand psychiatric diagnoses, right? Why would they be incentivized to increase the medicalization of normal human emotions? Because they get more status, prestige, income, standing. The more they try to convince people that they need their services. Right? I'm an Alexander Technique teacher. If I can convince you that what you most need right now is an Alexander Technique lesson so that you locate the source of your self-defeating behavior and your unnecessary muscular compression and your voice constriction and your social awkwardness, and that Alexander Technique is the best thing for what ails you, right? I'm going to have a lot more clients. I'm going to make a lot more money. I'm going to have a lot more status, right? I'll be on easy street if only I can convince you to take some Alexander Technique lessons. So Horwitz posits that many mental illness conditions are really shaped by cultural and social expectations. Things like hysteria, multiple personality disorder, and depression are all shaped by our cultural and social expectations. He says that some mental disorders might have biological underpinnings, but usually it's social factors that play a more significant role in the expression of what's called mental illness. And he critiques the over-reliance on pharmaceutical treatments, aka drugs, when social interventions would likely be more effective. So by broadening the definition of mental illness, psychiatry does far more harm than good because it pathologizes, meaning renders an illness normal life experiences such as sadness. So I had a few setbacks this week and I felt sad. That wasn't a mental illness. That was a normal, natural, and healthy response to minor setbacks. So I asked Grok if Alan Horwitz believed that we can prevent major mental illness. And it says, well, he does acknowledge that some severe psychological conditions such as schizophrenia and bipolar disorder might well fit the traditional disease models. All right, I've got my light up here on my desk. I'm trying to provide you the highest quality technical experience. I'm trying to give you a vivid, compelling picture right now, but the bloody light keeps sliding around. And then I asked Grok, can you prevent major mental illness? And it said, oh, yeah. And these are probably good things, but they're not going to prevent major mental illness. Early intervention and awareness, lifestyle modifications, nutrition, sleep, social and emotional support, gratitude, meditation, and yoga, mental health education and stigma reduction, parenting and early childhood support, policy and environmental changes, professional help. That these things can help in prevention, but maybe many mental illnesses, the more serious ones, may well be due to genetic, biological, and other complicated factors. Right, so we spend most of our mental health dollars treating people who do not have a mental illness. They're just experiencing normal human emotions when they go through difficult times.
The government didn't promise something for everyone.
There's something for everyone.
In New York, Mayor Bill de Blasio appointed his wife head of a program meant to address mental illness.
I am the First Lady of New York City.
Her program, Thrive, says 1 in 5 New Yorkers has a mental health condition.
Thrive includes 54 initiatives backed up by almost $1 billion.
But most of that money goes to people who are not very sick, writes Jaffe in City Journal.
They wrap anything that makes you sad, bad grades, poverty, coming from a single-family household, in a mental health narrative.
1 in 5 New Yorkers have a diagnosable mental health condition in any given year.
Blurring the lines between various mild mental disorders such as anxiety or mild depression and schizophrenia is not a bug, it's a feature of the program. The program is supposed to do that because it believes that the only way that New Yorkers will support improvements to mental illness policy is if they are convinced that everybody has a mental illness.
I'm not able to sleep at night.
Seems like I'm arguing with the people I love nonstop.
They're totally oblivious to the bigger problems.
20% fight mental health woe.
If you have anxiety, you're in that 20%. If we're going to spend all our money on people who are anxious or can't sleep, what's left for the seriously ill?
Not much. Thrive spends 80% of its money on problems like anxiety and loneliness. Money that Jaffe says would provide housing and basic treatment to more than half the seriously mentally ill and homeless. Mental health professionals want to help people.
No, they're focused on all the wrong things. If you ask any cop what we need, he's going to say, we need more hospitals, we need easier civil commitments so that when I bring somebody there.
Right, think about how dramatically the quality of life in our big cities would improve if the severely mentally ill were in institutions. Think how much safer we'd be.
Admitted, we need to keep them on their medications so they don't deteriorate. Now I go to a mental health conference. I go, well, we have to educate the public and we have to fight stigma. The ability to get care has become inversely related to need.
Why?
It's a much easier population to serve. They don't.
Wow. Right. The ability to get mental health care is inversely proportionate to need, meaning that the needy get the least compared to what they need, and those who have the least needs get the most.
Cost as much to help. Serving the seriously mentally ill is a really difficult task.
But let's say America did focus care on the sickest people. What happens if they then stop taking their meds? You can't force them to take the medication forever.
There are people who lack the maturity of their faculties, and as a kind and compassionate society, we should be helping them get treatment, not helping them go further into psychosis.
46 states now allow officials to order dangerous people into assisted outpatient treatment, which forces them to accept treatment, including medication. I would fear my government having the right to forcibly drug me. What if some psychiatrist doesn't like my politics? Maybe I'll get locked up.
Nobody can lock anybody up without extensive court review. But being psychotic is not a right to be protected. It's an illness to be treated. Making someone accept treatment can free them from the bastille of their psychosis. It's a reasonable use of the police powers of the state to help people who can't help themselves.
Helping people who don't help themselves before they hurt themselves or others, and helping them without just locking them away. That would certainly be more compassionate than what we do now.
Okay, here is a great 1-minute
Who
video.
are very funny often grew up in circumstances that were not funny at all.
That's interesting you say that, because I remember Jimmy Carr saying, people always ask me if I'm depressed. That's why I'm a comedian, but actually you should ask if my parents were depressed.
Perfect. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. I mean, very often the wit of the child is there to ward off the parent's depression.
Really?
Children come into the world, and all of us are honed by nature to figure out, what do I need to do here to survive? In some families, you need to excel academically. In some families, you need to fail academically. In some families, you need to be very witty. In some families, you need to be invisible.
Why would you need to fail in some families?
Oh, well, the classic one is parental envy. Some parents are hugely envious of their own children, and they cannot bear that their child, who they've put on the earth, should be happier than they've managed to be. And so therefore the child has to take early retirement. You know, families are difficult places, and dynamics occur that really go way beyond what we're ordinarily prepared to tolerate.
Wow. So many insights in just a 1-minute video. Right, I just went crazy using Grok today. Incredibly useful tool for just summarizing books, summarizing ideas. What do I got here? All right, everybody wants to change the world. Right, a few years ago, I developed the realization that every form of life, not just Jews, not just white people, not just Muslims, every form of life wants to transform the world, and these effects inevitably harm other forms of life, thus creating a battle for survival. And when I talked about this with a philosopher of biology, he gave me the term niche construction. It's a great term. I fear I haven't given it over adequately on this show, so I went to Grok, got a summary of niche construction as understood by biologists. It's the process by which organisms, meaning things that are alive, modify their own environments and the environments of other species, thereby altering selection pressures and evolutionary pathways. So you have active modification, right, changing habitats through behaviors and physical alterations, such as beavers building dams, earthworms improve soil structure through burrowing, birds nesting. Then you have passive modification, such as coral reefs creating diverse ecosystems by their existence, trees altering microclimates. So, for example, the eucalyptus question. Eucalypti often transported from their native environment to a newer environment, such as California, and then they frequently outcompete the native live things, native plants and trees, and they outcompete the natives for water, and they emit a compound that makes it near impossible for other plants and trees to grow underneath or near them. So we got trees altering, microclimates or soil composition. Then we have evolutionary feedback, right? You change the environment, and that can influence your group's evolution as well as the evolution of other species. Changes in habitat lead to new selection pressures, favoring traits that are advantageous in the modified environment. So just think about how this translates to people, right? We change the world around us, and the world around us then changes evolutionary development. It rewards and punishes different traits, leading to survival of the fittest. So we have co-evolution going on between species and their environments. So any group can increase the odds of their own survival and their own opportunities to thrive. They can increase the territory that they dominate. They can create new niches for other species to exploit. This can lead to biodiversity, or it can lead to other forms of life going extinct. So traditional views of natural selection focus on how environments select for certain traits, but niche construction emphasizes how organisms select and engineer their environments. All right, thanks, Grok. Then here's a book I just heard about on a YouTube discussion, and I thought, I want to read this book. It was published in 1986, Thinking in Time, The Uses of History for Decision Makers. by Richard Neustadt and Ernest May. It is a seminal work that explores how historical understanding can improve decision-making. So, main thesis: understanding history is crucial for decision-making because it provides context, patterns, and analogies. By thinking in time, leaders can avoid repeating past mistakes and capitalize on historical successes. Decision-makers often rely on analogies from history to understand current problems, but the book cautions against simplistic or misleading analogies, such as everything is Munich 1938, don't make a deal with Hitler. So the authors advocate for a deeper analysis to ensure the parallels are relevant and accurate. The authors discuss the importance of considering both short-term and long-term implications of decisions. So instead of stage one thinking, as Tom Sowell calls it, where you just look at what will happen if we do X, but you don't think about how there will be implications down the road if you do X. So when you follow the news, there tends to be a focus on immediate outcomes at the expense of future considerations. Then they have framing questions. What past events are relevant to the current situation? Have similar situations resolved before? What were the outcomes of those resolutions? And the book uses several case studies, including the Cuban Missile Crisis and the Vietnam War. So Cuban Missile Crisis was a positive example where President Kennedy's administration used historical lessons to navigate the crisis, considered precedents like the Bay of Pigs invasion. And then Vietnam War was a cautionary tale where historical analogies such as the Munich Agreement with Hitler were misapplied, leading to escalation. Thanks, Grok. All right, the subject book here by DJ Jaffe really got me cranking. And Elliot says in the chat, my chat comments secrete a venom that discourages the flourishing of other chats. And all you blokes chats, they discourage the flourishing of women in our midst. According to YouTube analytics, my audience is 100% male. All right, insane consequences, how the mental health industry fails the mentally ill. This book by DJ Jaffe came out in 2017. And here he is giving a talk at the National Conservatives Conference in 2018.
Thank you all for coming. Before beginning, I have to say, being at this conference to give this particular talk reminds me of a job interview that I once went on. I walked into the room and the executive asked me, he said, DJ, what's your best quality? And like every applicant, I made up some stuff about myself, how hard I work, my dedication. But then he asked me, he said, DJ, what's your worst quality? And I said, well, when someone asks me my opinion, I assume that they want it. And I fear I may be about to make that same mistake. I don't expect everyone to agree with everything I say. You may not agree with anything I say. And no one has ever accused me of being subtle. In fact, my wife says that I'm a human trigger warning. And I may be about to trigger some of you today, because I'm going to try to convince you that some of the biggest problems faced by the seriously mentally ill are as a result of what we do. That we are the problem, that we are misleading government officials, and that is why the seriously mentally ill can't get treatment. I am going to try to convince you that we fail the seriously mentally ill when we mislead government officials into denying violence rather than taking steps to reduce it. We fail the seriously mentally ill when we try to convince government to spend on improving mental wellness in the masses rather than delivering evidence-based treatment to the seriously ill. And we fail the seriously mentally ill when we try to convince government that it is stigma rather than lack of services that presents the major barrier to care for the seriously mentally ill. Now let me explain why what I'm saying is different than most mental health advocates claim. I am not a mental health advocate. I am an advocate for the seriously mentally ill. To put that in perspective, 100% of the population can have their mental wellness improved. 18% have something that's in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, but only 4% have a serious mental illness, meaning one that creates a functional impairment that inhibits their ability to engage in daily life activities. Now, we can argue whether it's 2%, whether it's 6%. The boundary may be debatable, but the extremities are clear. If you think the FBI planted a transmitter in your head, chances are that's serious mental illness. John Hinckley shot President Reagan because he knew, not thought, he knew that that was the absolute best way to get a date with Jodie Foster. That is serious mental illness, and we are failing people with it. The first way we do this is we fail the seriously mentally ill when we mislead about violence. After incidents like Parkland, Virginia Tech, Aurora, Colorado, we pull out our most popular claim: the mentally ill are no more violent than others. Nonsense. The untreated seriously mentally ill are more violent than others, and we in this room know it. Our psychiatric units are locked. Liver units aren't. Psych nurses wear panic buttons. Those in cancer units don't. Our outreach workers go out in pairs for their own safety. We're doing workshops here how to protect the behavioral health force, and we want contracts to train police to deal with people who have mental illness, not psoriasis. Of course the untreated seriously mentally ill are more violent than others, and we fail the seriously mentally ill when we try to hide that because we prevent solutions. Now, why do we do it? We think it causes stigma to admit the mentally ill are more violent than others.
Yes, the mentally ill are more violent than others. So I've been struggling to transmit Ronnie Guldmann's essay in progress on the twin pathologies of fat acceptance and COVID vaccine conspiracism. So I turned the document over to Grok and some Adobe AI program and got a much simpler summary of this essay in progress. So it's about the parallel ideologies of fat acceptance and anti-vax conspiracism, highlighting their similarities in politicizing health issues and in rejecting mainstream medical consensus. The essay discusses the cultural and ideological conflicts between fat acceptance and anti-vaccine movements. And it begins with the story of Sweetgreen CEO Jonathan Newman sparking controversy in October 2021 by linking obesity to severe COVID outcomes and suggesting taxes on processed foods. He got criticized for fat shaming and devaluing vaccines. So the fat acceptance movement views medical concerns about obesity as fat phobia. And the anti-vaccine movement sees vaccine mandates as elitist control. So it's interesting that the fat acceptance movement doesn't claim that obesity is a disability. They just claim it's another identity. So both movements politicize health issues, challenging the medical consensus as tools of oppressive regimes, whether patriarchal or elitist. So fat acceptance activists argue that societal fat phobia causes more harm than obesity, while anti-vaxxers claim vaccines cause more harm than the diseases that they are supposed to prevent. Fat acceptance is less stigmatized in liberal circles than anti-vaccine sentiment, which is linked to right-wing conspiracies. Okay, fat acceptance advocates highlight legitimate cultural grievances, right, including the fetishization of thinness and the stigma and discrimination against fat people. The text criticizes diet culture for promoting unsustainable diets that prioritize rapid weight loss over long-term health. Right, most Americans were not obese prior to the 1970s. After the 1970s, most Americans became obese. So it wasn't that Americans suddenly had a dramatic loss in self-control. All right, there are environmental factors, perhaps ultra-processed foods and chemicals in our diets, and maybe more stress-filled lifestyles, right, that account for why now a majority of Americans are obese. It wasn't just there was this dramatic increase in sloth and gluttony among Americans. When I go back to Australia, most Australians are obese. All right, the effort to lose weight varies among individuals, right? Some just face greater challenges due to their genes and due to social factors. All right, and then we discuss in the essay the overselling of COVID vaccines, how their benefits were sometimes exaggerated, and you had the rise of anti-vaccine sentiments in response. So many public health experts and politicians overstated the effectiveness of COVID vaccines, especially for those with strong, young, healthy, natural immunity. Despite some exaggeration, vaccines have been effective in curbing severe illness and death from COVID, even if they don't prevent transmission and lesser symptoms. So 20% of respondents believe that when you get a vaccine, you are given a microchip. And only 46% dismiss that idea as definitely false. Right. Big Pharma is greedy. What's good for Big Pharma isn't always good for America. So Big Pharma needs accurate criticism, just as you and I do. But the idea that the global elite are using COVID vaccines for thought control is not plausible. The complexity of nutrition science and the rigorous testing of pharmaceuticals make it difficult to falsify results. And thinking that the elite are just a bunch of superhuman agents orchestrating global events highlights the impracticality of these coordinated conspiracy efforts. Right-wing anti-vax belief in elite domination through public health mandates is a product of ongoing resentments and a simplistic understanding of how power works. So Rony Guldmann's essay explores the cultural and ideological reasons behind right-wing vaccine rejection. It is a way to reject elite oversight, elite control, elite bullying, public health extremism. It's a way of rejecting government interference in your life. It's not just the result of mere cognitive failure. Just like some conservatives have taken up smoking as a rebellion against the moral consensus that the two most important things in life are to be happy and to just get along. So many right-wing populists experience public health measures as ideological tools of liberal elites and as intrusions on their own values of self-reliance, healthy choices. The right-wing populists resist what they feel are threats to their independence and freedom. And many of our social betters don't recognize that their hygienic conception of life is not widely shared. Right? Other social classes don't share their self-health obsessions. And the lack of candor by many politicians and public health authorities fueled public distrust and conspiracy theories. So what was driving anti-vax sentiment during COVID was anti-elite resentment and the perception of elites as a cohesive, malevolent entity thus driving the right-wing vaccine rejection. So right-wing populist resistance to vaccines is a reaction to perceived liberal domination and cultural marginalization. So both the fat acceptance crowd and the anti-vaxxers have authenticity narratives. They feel that they are able to tear down the veil and reveal the lies behind the medical consensus. So fat acceptance promotes the idea of overcoming social obsession with thinness, and anti-vaxxers emphasize a return to traditional values and natural vitality. So both movements challenge prevailing social orders. The fat acceptance crowd opposes the patriarchy, and anti-vaxxers reject the liberal elites. So overall, fat acceptance is something that is promoted by the university educated and those with an above average IQ. Anti-vax ideology primarily comes from those without a university education. So the anti-vaxxers tend to have more extreme delusions, while the fat acceptance crowd tends to be lost in a world of postmodern theorizing, dramatically separated from reality. So both sides accept legitimacy of health as a concept. Well, at least the anti-vaxxers do. The fat acceptance crowd, they challenge what's commonly accepted to be good, ruddy health. The right-wing anti-vaxxers tend to be more plain-spoken, and the left-wing fat acceptance crowd tend to be more calculated and obfuscating. Progressives tolerate the fat acceptance crowd, even though they're anti-scientific, but they see that their heart is in the right place, right? And progressives understand that the fat activists are not likely to gain widespread acceptance. Anti-vaccine ideologies are considered more harmful due to their potential to attract more followers and then to cause significant public health issues. And the reasons to believe certain studies indicate that Republican voters were 43% more likely to die from COVID due to their lower vaccination rates. So one can understand fat activists as victims of multiple interlocking systems of oppression, including nature, capitalism, and cultural stigmatization. Fat activists address real-life challenges. Anti-vax progressives are urged to understand anti-vaxxers as victims of circumstance similar to fat activists. So both fat acceptance and right-wing orneriness have social and biological roots, and they should not be moralized differently. Right there, much easier summary of Rony Guldmann's thoughtful essay, thanks to the powers of Grok, which is on Twitter.
Nonsense. It is not admitting to violence. It is violence by the minority that tars the majority. If we really want to reduce stigma, we have to reduce the violence. And this is something that we have prevented in the mental health industry. As a result of our not focusing on the seriously mentally ill and denying violence exists, there are 400,000 people with mental illness, in serious mental illness, not just mental health issues, serious mental illness who are incarcerated. 750,000 are on probation or parole. Now, we like to blame police when something goes wrong, but the police step in when one condition is met. The mental health system fails. And in New York City alone, they went on 165,000 EDP, emotionally disturbed person, calls last year, almost all without incident. But over 25% of all.
It is disturbing that rates of schizophrenia are not evenly distributed among the races. So I'm thinking about one group that is particularly creative and also has disproportionately high rates of schizophrenia. So different communities, different peoples, different nations are susceptible to different forms of mental illness. Insanity was first noted among the English, I think, in the 16th or 17th century, because nationalism first developed among the English. And a nationalistic society is going to be a highly competitive society, and a relatively free and increasingly democratic society. These are all implications of nationalism. And when you live in an increasingly free society, you have more and more choices. And therefore, if you are not thriving, right, you have more and more reasons to blame yourself, which is incredibly painful. So you may well be incentivized to separate yourself from reality, where you're failing, to increasingly live in a world of delusion. So the more freedom, the more insanity, right? The fewer choices you have in life, right, the less chance that you're going to go mentally nuts. Okay, I've been putting Grok to good use. I often throw around the term hero system. So I wrote into Grok, what is a hero system according to Ernest Becker? Ernest Becker wrote the classic book, The Denial of Death. And Grok says, according to Ernest Becker, a hero system is essentially a cultural or social framework that provides individuals with the opportunities to feel heroic. So let's have a look at good old Ernest Becker. Right, The Denial of Death. That's his most famous book. And so the opportunity to achieve a sense of heroism is crucial for managing our fear of mortality and our need for meaning and self-esteem. And society is a symbolic action system, a structure of statuses and roles, customs and rules for behavior designed to serve as a vehicle for earthly heroism. So each community has its own hero system. Each culture has its own hero system, characterized by different roles and different standards of heroism, from high-profile figures like Churchill or Buddha to everyday heroism like that of a coal miner or a priest. And these hero systems are not just about physical bravery. They encompass any endeavor that gives individuals a sense of cosmic significance, possessing lasting value beyond their mortal existence. Whether a system is magical, religious, primitive, secular, scientific, or civilized, it serves the same purpose: to allow individuals to earn feelings of primary value, of cosmic specialness, of ultimate usefulness to creation, of unshakable meaning, by contributing something of lasting worth to society. This could be through tangible creations like buildings, or through intangible contributions like raising a family Becker argues that these hero systems are fundamentally about denying death. They help individuals to feel that they have transcended the mere biological reality of life and death by achieving something that outlives or outshines their own decay. Every society functions as a religion, thus providing myths and roles for people to fulfill their needs for heroism. And this is the central problem of human life, this need for a sense that our life has significance and meaning. So a pretty good summary there from Grok on the meaning of hero system, according to good old Ernest Becker. Meanwhile, back in the news, here's the Commentary Magazine podcast crew.
Things are pretty good for Trump right now.
We should mention something else in terms of these questions relating to his cabinet picks, which is that once again, Trumpians, people on the right, are proved to be bizarrely fortunate, not in their choice of enemy, but in the way their enemy decides to engage with them to try to destroy them. And that was this bizarre event that happened yesterday, non-event that happened yesterday when Pete Hegseth, the nominee for the Secretary of Defense, announced that Publica, which is a non-profit news organization with more money than God, I believe they have something like $100 million in the bank, known best for rooting through the garbage of Harlan Crow and Clarence Thomas to find receipts showing that Harlan Crow bought him, a McRib, somewhere when they were taking a vacation together. That ProPublica had approached Hegseth with the news that they were told that he had claimed that he had been accepted to West Point and had denied and had decided not to go to West Point in 2003, I think, and that West Point told ProPublica that Hegseth had not been, they had no record or evidence that Hegseth had been admitted to West Point. Well, what did Pete Hegseth have to say about this? And Hegseth did what you now do, what social media now allows you to do, which is get ahead of the story. He went on social media. He said, there is a hit job going on against me, claiming that I lied about getting into West Point. Here is a picture of my acceptance to West Point. And there is this document, this thing that he got from West Point saying you've been admitted to the West Point class of 2003 or whatever it was. Whereupon Jesse Eisinger, the editor of ProPublica, puts out this 10-tweet self-congratulatory stream about how what they actually did was journalism at its finest. They got a tip. They followed the tip down. They went to Hegseth. And you know who really kind of behaved a little badly was Hegseth, because he attacked them rather than they weren't going to publish the story. And instead he turned it into a story. They did the journalism and Hegseth made it into propaganda. Now, the reason that this is great for Hegseth and thrillingly bad for ProPublica, a really repugnant organization, is that ProPublica is not saying who at West Point told them that Pete Hegseth had not been admitted to West Point. This
10 days ago, Pete Hegseth looked like a dead man walking, and now it appears that he's likely to be confirmed at this point. I put into Grok, does Kamala Harris have a drinking problem? Grok says there is no concrete evidence from reputable sources to support this claim. I put into Grok, why did the news media hide Joe Biden's senility? And I'm told that the topic is complex and contentious with various perspectives offering different interpretations. Okay, here's the good stuff. Explain Buffett identity in liberalism. And Grok says, Buffett identity in liberalism refers to a concept developed by philosopher Charles Taylor in his exploration of secularism and modernity, specifically within the framework of his book, A Modern Social Imaginary and Sources of the Self. Here is a breakdown of the idea. Definition, Buffett identity, right? It contrasts with the porous self. A Buffett identity is one where the individual experiences a clear distinction between their inner self and the external world. This sense of self is buffered or protected from direct influence by external forces like spirits, gods, or social pressures in a way that was not as pronounced in pre-modern societies. So this concept arises with the secularization of society, where the boundary between the self and the world becomes more impermeable. In pre-modern times, people were considered to have porous selves, open to cosmic forces, spirits, or divine interventions. If you're on the right, you're more likely to believe in a porous self. If you're on the left, you believe in the buffered self. So modern individuals are seen as self-contained with a clear boundary separating the inner psychological life from external influences. I don't get this because almost all of my inner psychological life revolves around people that I know or have known in real life. So Buffett identity supports the liberal value of individualism and autonomy. Individuals with Buffett identities believe in the capacity for self-governance, making decisions based on personal reason rather than external spiritual or communal dictates. And I don't think that's true. I think the way that we operate is that we're profoundly affected by our community. We're not primarily individuals, we are primarily members of extended families. So this autonomy is central to liberal philosophy, which values personal freedom and choice. This buffering also relates to the disenchantment of the world, where the world loses its magical and mystical quality. So the Buffett self navigates a world where natural causes rather than supernatural causes explain what's going on. There is an emphasis on the development of an inner psychological life where your thoughts, feelings, and beliefs are private. This privacy supports the liberal notion of rights to one's beliefs, expressions, and lifestyle without undue interference. The Buffett self leads to a more individualistic society. It also fosters a more atomized society where communal bonds are weaker. It leads to a society where personal freedom is paramount. So you always wondered, 40, could you at least clearly explain the notion of Buffett identity in liberal thinking? And there, I did it.
This was a hit job inside the United States Military Academy at West Point against the potentially incoming Secretary of Defense. When you are misled in investigative journalism by a source, one of the disciplines that is supposed to exist in the world of the hit job is that you expose the person who fed you the false information. Because the leak and exposure system requires a certain level of honesty on the part of the leaker. If you are going to protect the identity of the leaker who leaked something false, then you are complicit in the crime that is the leak that Hegseth exposed. Anyway, my view is because of this.
I mean, I would just say it could be just as likely that the PR person at West Point was incompetent and couldn't find the file. I mean, I do think they should certainly.
Somebody said to ProPublica, Pete Hegseth was not admitted to West Point.
Well, they asked, and the response was no. We have no evidence. We don't have any evidence they did that.
Why did they ask? Why did they ask? That's the question you're not asking is why did they ask?
It's a question for ProPublica, but I would say we should hold our fire a little bit on the West Point side until we find out whether it's more likely just incompetence and bureaucracy gone wrong than
I don't agree. I think somebody at West Point told ProPublica that Pete Hegseth was lying. It was a stolen valor thing, that he was lying about having been admitted to West Point, and that's why they pursued the story.
Well, imagine a world where...
And we're going to find out because Tom Cotton is on the case, so we're going to find out.
Imagine a world, though, where Hegseth didn't keep his letter.
Right.
That's actually more likely the case when it comes to how the media targets nominees on the right versus the
or
left.
Kavanaugh didn't keep
How did
his
Brett
calendars.
Kavanaugh save himself?
Right, his calendars. Right.
Because he saved his calendars from when he was 15 years old. I would be dead if I were Brett Kavanaugh. I mean, I didn't keep a calendar when I was 15, and if I had, my mother would have thrown it away the minute I went off to college.
That was a big moment for OCD Americans.
That absolutely true.
The ProPublica episode that you described is part of a larger story about how Hegseth has turned his candidacy for Secretary of Defense around. At this point last week, while I was writing my column for the Free Beacon, it looked very dire for Hegseth. Ron DeSantis' name had been floated. Joni Ernst, the senator from Iowa, who was not convinced that Hegseth was the right candidate. We had those stories in the New York Times about the email that Hegseth's mom had sent to him talking about his treatment of women. So it didn't look good. But then, conveniently, as soon as my column was published talking about the Trump transition math, things began to turn around. And Hegseth leaned into the fight by arranging a public relations campaign with his fellow soldiers, with people who had worked with him at Concerned Veterans for America, who go on the record in support of his leadership and management. And that got Trump's attention and Trump's support. So by the time Trump gave the interview on Meet the Press last Sunday, he was vocal in his support for Hegseth. And now a senator like Joni Ernst seems much more open to supporting Hegseth down the line when they have the hearing. And this ProPublica story is just another kind of victory that Hegseth has won on his way to confirmation as Secretary of Defense. Doesn't mean he's out of the woods.
Right.
Because
no one is ever out of the woods, because something could come up that is actually substantively.
Well, he does have 2 ex-wives,
right?
Who, I'm not sure. I don't know what the state of their relations are, right?
Well,
and that could be a problem.
He's been lucky in his media enemies, I will say, because they've yet to get anyone on the record with any of the allegations. Everything's been off the record. The publishing the mom's email, I think, worked against them and for him, because he became sympathetic, because who publishes someone's mother's email? It's ridiculous.
Yeah. Well, and then she went on the air to defend him.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah.
And it's the lack of anyone on the record. Now, if they can find a woman who will come forward and go on the record and accuse him of things, that's going to change the game, certainly for senators like Ernst and others who are still wavering.
Yeah, I actually think the on the record thing is important because of what happened with Fox, which was, they were saying that, people at Fox are, were unhappy with his, I don't know, some said he drank beers in the morning, on the show or whatever. And all of that was off the record or anonymous sources. And then a wave of Fox talkers, not just employees, but people that the public knows, people especially that Republican senators, their constituents watch every day, recognizable faces, came out one by one and just said, no, this has not been my experience. And that, I think, made a big difference, because you can get 10 off the record and 10 anonymous, and then 10 faces that these are the people you see with Hegseth every day. And they're all saying this is crazy, whatever.
Right. I just saw an interesting Twitter thread. Bloke is named Thomas Arnold. I recently spent 10 days in the US for business. I discovered the ocean between us isn't water, it is mindset. 7 uncomfortable truths about US versus UK culture, and this rings true to me. Number 1, financial openness. Americans freely discuss salary, deals, and revenue. Brits and Australians are guarded and awkward on money. 2, belief in possibility. You discuss big plans in America, you get greeted with why not. In the UK, you hear why bother. One culture expands, the other stifles. Rising tide mentality. Americans celebrate wins with genuine, infectious enthusiasm. It's all let's go, high fives and celebrations. The Brits cringe with impotent envy and think, who does he think he is? One attitude lifts all boats, the other sinks them. All right. Number 4, learning focus. Every win shared triggered rapid fire questions. What worked? How'd you do it? Can you teach me? Americans study success. Brits suspect it. 5, risk tolerance. Failure in America is proof that you took a big swing and missed this time. In the UK, it's a generational stain we try scrubbing off quietly behind closed doors. No wonder that America scales while Britain stagnates. All right, number 6, speed of execution. US, let's make it happen. Jump on a call, refer through networks. Action first mentality. In the UK, you hear let's be realistic, list all problems first. Bloody hell, I'm trying to keep my light up here to give you the highest quality of production, and it keeps sliding away. List all problems first, go into the worst case scenario. Every reason not to try. They ship while we shuffle. Point number 7, follow the money. Britain will lose nearly 10,000 millionaires this year. The US is forecast to gain 4,000. Capital flows where it is respected, not resented. The cost of British cynicism. Our markets shrink while theirs grow. Our talent leaves while theirs arrives. Our companies stay small while theirs scale. Thoughts from a Brit on American entrepreneurial culture.
Whatever. So I think that part of it has really been, normally the character witness isn't as strong as people hope it would be, because, when somebody has certain types of accusations of misbehavior, especially during the Me Too era, you sometimes got these letters like, here's an open letter from all the women that so-and-so has never assaulted, right? And it's like, that only gets you so far, because it only takes one that you actually did. But this is sort of different because it's about his meme. It's about the way he carries himself. That is something that you can't kill with anonymous sourcing, I think.
I also think Hegseth has benefited from the sheer speed, the rapid fire aspect of Trump's picks here, the flurry of personalities that he's thrown up for people to try to tear down, has caused the media and Trump's enemies and detractors to sort of say, oh, wait, who are we focusing on? Do we focus on the Hegseth? Wait, there's Kash Patel just popped up. Are we dealing with that? Are we dealing with that? and it sort of has them one step off.
Well, the way that Trump world thinks about it is that Hegseth is acting as a heat shield right now, who's actually protecting Gabbard, RFK, and Kash Patel from deep scrutiny, because people are very interested in the Hegseth story. The media has continued to dig. The senators are meeting with him, and he's meeting with, I think, Murkowski today. So you're right. On one hand, all of the names kind of flood the zone and make it difficult for the opposition to concentrate their fire. On the other hand, however, Hegseth being kind of the most famous, I wouldn't say even the most controversial. He's controversial in a lot of ways, but he's definitely the most prominent, and he's become public facing in a way that a lot of the others have not today.
Normally, you don't give interviews when you're up for Senate confirmation to a cabinet position, but Pete Hegseth has very smart people running his operation. So I asked Grok to summarize Rony Guldmann's book in progress, Conservative Claims of Cultural Oppression on the Nature and Origins of Conservaphobia. And this is what Grok summarized. Cultural oppression by liberal elites. Rony Guldmann explores how conservatives perceive themselves as being culturally oppressed by liberal elites in various sectors like media, academia, Hollywood, and public education. These claims are often not explicitly labeled as cultural oppression, but are the underlying theme in many cultural and political debates. Historical context. The book delves into the historical and philosophical underpinnings of these claims, suggesting that they represent a resistance against the imposition of modern liberal values over traditional conservative ones. Conflict is framed as a continuation of the tension between the modern and the pre-modern worlds, where conservatives resist what they see as the civilizing mission of liberal modernity. Philosophical examination. So Rony Guldmann did a PhD in philosophy prior to going to law school, prior to going to Stanford Law School. So he examines claims from a philosophical perspective, questions what human nature would need to be like for various claims to hold water. So Rony Guldmann is now, I think, a personal injury attorney in New York City because he kind of broke the code of how you're supposed to operate in the academic world. He explores the implications on moral and political philosophy, arguing that these claims reveal an intuition about liberalism being more a constructed identity than an inevitable outcome of the Enlightenment. Conservatives view their cultural grievances as resistance against cultural colonization by liberal elites, akin to an ethnic group fighting against cultural imperialism. Conservatives see themselves defending traditional American values against the coercive and condescending efforts of liberal elites and their rationalization. By adopting the intellectual and moral arguments of the left, conservatives can turn them against liberals, which is what Rony Guldmann does in this book. They can frame themselves as the new countercultural liberation movement fighting against liberal cultural hegemony. Rony's book posits that today's culture wars are essentially a modern iteration of historical conflicts between those pushing modern identity, liberals, and those clinging to traditional identity, conservatives. So Rony Guldmann says these claims of cultural oppression are not merely political rhetoric, but they reveal profound existential and ontological, that means ultimate knowing, clashes about human identity, freedom, and cultural authenticity. So the book claims that the boundary between left and right might not be as clear-cut as often portrayed. And then I asked AI to summarize the main arguments in the book. Cultural oppression of conservatives. Conservatives feel culturally oppressed by liberal elites who dominate influential institutions like the media, academia, and entertainment, allowing liberals to impose their values and marginalize conservatives. Second argument, liberalism is a covertly sectarian ethos. So liberals don't see themselves as sectarian. They see themselves as having transcended all sect. They just see themselves as the natural, rational outcome of the Enlightenment pursuing benevolent ends. But liberalism is a comprehensive worldview that enforces its norms and values through cultural dominance, which is often disguised as neutral principles such as diversity, tolerance, and equality. Modern liberalism has its roots in Protestantism, which is Reformed Christianity. And liberalism has always harbored illiberal impulses, such as a desire for social control and imposing values on others. Liberalism is a secular religion. It's an outgrowth of Protestantism. has its own dogmas and rituals, wants to replace traditional religious values with its own moral framework, all under the guise of promoting secularism and rationality. Conservatives view their claims of cultural oppression as resistance against liberal hegemony, and they argue that liberal dominance stifles genuine debate and imposes a one-sided narrative. Rony Guldmann's book describes liberalism's hidden hierarchies. Liberalism creates hidden social hierarchies that privilege those who conform to its values while marginalizing others, thus dismissing conservatives as irrational and bigoted. The book calls for liberals to engage in self-examination to understand the cultural and psychological forces driving their beliefs and behaviors. Conservative grievances are rooted in a deeper understanding of human nature and history. The book discusses the subtraction account versus mutation counter narrative. So the subtraction account posits that modernity emerged by shedding earlier horizons, while the mutation counter narrative that Rony Guldmann proposes argues that modern liberal identity is a mutation of pre-modern religious ideals. Both liberals and conservatives operate within their own hero systems that provide a sense of cosmic specialness. The liberal hero system, however, is disguised as intellectual sophistication and scientific detachment. Conservatives argue that liberal elites impose their prejudices while condemning those of conservatives, creating a meta-equal protection problem concerning the differential ability to protect one's own hero system. Liberal elites' cultural privilege allows them to impose their values and norms on society while remaining insulated from similar scrutiny. And the cultural conflict between liberals and conservatives is rooted in deeper psychological and existential dimensions, with liberals' dismissive indignation towards conservatives just a pose to maintain their sense of superiority.
Fighting for his name and for his nomination. That has also helped people like Patel and Gabbard.
Tulsi probably needs it because she's been meeting with senators, and the senators have been saying, I didn't really like her, right? I mean, she's been getting some bad headlines and no good headlines lately. So that, I think, probably supports the thesis, because we're not actually seeing that turn into, oh boy, Tulsi's in trouble stories. Whereas if she were the only nominee right now that, were sort of out there on the table, you definitely would have those stories if senators are saying,
Look, she's going to have a very interesting hearing simply by dint of the fact that the main controversy involving her nomination involves her, shall we say, unconventional views on Syria as expressed, at the end of the last decade. And now, of course, Syria is undergoing this revolution, and she is going to have to answer questions in public at a confirmation hearing about where she stands on all of that. That could actually be more important than the private meetings that she is having. Like, this is a hearing where you could actually see somebody either find the right words to say about a fast-changing situation that would indicate that she would be a responsible steward of the position she holds, or she could blow herself up. And we don't really, she's very intelligent. She is a very good representative of herself in public, as we know from the 2019 debates in the Democratic presidential contest. But that's sort of an interesting place. I do think that it's worth spending 2 more seconds on Hegseth and the email, the release of the email of his mother. That was a turning point, because I had questions about Hegseth myself, was he really whatever? When the New York Times did that, my feeling was, I want him confirmed, because they cannot be allowed to get away with this. They cannot dig into a person's private family problems that have literally nothing whatsoever to do with the positions that he might take as the steward of the Pentagon, and take them and throw them in his face solely and exclusively to derail his career chances. The precedent the successful precedent of that kind of hit would be so potentially ruinous for the future, as now we know nobody's private information is protectable, right? I mean, anyway, nobody can protect anything anymore. There are going to have to be guardrails put up by institutions not to do stuff like this based on their own just simply innate moral standards. Like, would you want your mother's email to be put on the front page of the New York Times? They did it anyway, and they had to be stopped. And so I think there was a weird effect all over Washington where people went, whoa, 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 whoa. The way people did 30 years ago when Connie Chung sat down with Newt Gingrich's mother and said, what did Newt say to you about Hillary Clinton? And Newt Gingrich's mother was like, well, I can't tell you that. That's just between me and Newt. And then Connie Chung said, with cameras running, it's just between us. Just you and me. Just tell what did he say? And then Newt Gingrich's mother said, he said she was a bee. And Connie Chung ran the story and gave Newt Gingrich 2 years of life because, hey, you don't go and gull somebody's rural Georgia mother on national television to get a news story out of it.
But the New York Times, and I wrote about this this drove me crazy too, is the source of, I wrote about it in my column this month for the magazine. But their argument was, and this shows that they haven't had a reckoning about Trump winning again yet, because their logic was this: we have to write about how Hegseth treats women because he said he doesn't want women in combat. Sexual assault of women in the military is a big deal. He's downplaying that. So we have to go after his character, particularly with regard to women. And he's had this messy personal life. So let's get into that. The problem is that the reporter they put on this beat is one of the same ones who won a Pulitzer for basically spinning the Russia hoax at the New York Times, and obviously very anti-Trump in her writing. As you can see, I went back and read a lot of her work. She's very clearly biased against Trump in particular and Republicans in general. But how she got this piece of evidence that was the linchpin for her story is questionable. She was asked by commenters in the New York Times, many of whom I will say were appalled to see someone's mom's private email correspondence in the New York Times. And she said, well, we didn't break any privacy laws, which is very different than what we're discussing, which is a norm violation by obviously violating the privacy of both Hegseth and his mother in publishing this correspondence. So they got it from someone.
Okay, you're saying 40, stop with the news of the day. Let's get back to DJ Jaffe's TED Talk at the National Conservative Conference in 2018.
Officer line of duty deaths are on EDP calls to people we claim are no more violent than others. And we mislead about the other form of violence, our violence to self, suicide. Another one of the industry's real popular claim is that suicide is the second leading cause of death in kids under 24. Now, the claim technically is true, but it's only true because kids rarely die of anything. Thank God. Suicide is primarily an adult disorder. And as you can see by the black bars in this chart, 5,500 suicides were under age 24, 37,500 were over it. But as a result of our saying we have to spend more to prevent suicide in kids, SAMHSA has spent $54 million to reduce suicide in the under 24 and only $2 million in the older 24. As a result of our efforts, our misleading, suicide funds are going to where suicide isn't, to kids. And as a result of that, more adults are dying. Now, the second way we fail the seriously mentally ill is when we mislead officials into thinking we should spend more improving mental health and mental wellness in the masses rather than on treating the seriously ill. As a result of our advocacy, the ability to get care has largely become inversely related to need. The least seriously ill are going to the head of the line, and the most seriously ill are going to jails, they're going to shelters, they're going to prisons, and they're going to morgues. We did that. Now, I know this group favors community spending, and as you can see, that's where state funding is going, reinvestment. Funds have been moving from state hospitals, which by definition serve the seriously ill, to community programs, and this is what's been happening. This is state spending over time. But that's not where patients are moving. Patients are moving from hospitals, which are going way down, to jails, which are going way up. But we in the industry still claim that if we reduce hospitals, we will reduce institutionalization. That has nothing to do with reality. There are people, and by the way, the difference in the totals between
Glib Medley says, I felt robotic and I started crying after I listened to 100 Luke Ford shorts in a row. That was so bad. That was so traumatizing. The dear old Glib stopped following me on X until I stopped posting shorts. And then only then was he able to come back. Thoughts and prayers.
1960 and today is largely accounted by homelessness, so the total institutionalized is roughly the same.
I've given up on cutting shorts. I mean, it was fun. I've added probably 2,000 subscribers total to my 4 different YouTube channels. It was fun to get my thoughts out there, sometimes get 5,000, 10,000 plus views. But it's a lot of work cutting shorts. I want to get back to my big picture thinking. All right, I can read more books if I'm cutting fewer shorts.
Now, We have to start ending this mental illness to jail pipeline. And there are several ways we can do it. We should support hospitals. And that means eliminating the federal government's IMD exclusion, which is federally sanctioned discrimination against the mentally ill. We have to make it easier for people to get treatment before they become danger to self or others, rather than preserving laws that require them to become danger to self or others. And that means we have to stand up against Bazelon, Protection and Advocacy, the ACLU, radical peer communities, the Center for Mental Health Services, and others who believe being psychotic, delusional, hallucinating is a right to be protected rather than an illness to be treated. And we have to vigorously support assisted outpatient treatment. Now, assisted outpatient treatment is only for a very, very tiny percent of the population. It's for a subset of the 4% who don't voluntarily engage in treatment. And what it allows is it allows the courts to order the person to accept community treatment for 1 year, so they continue to live in the community. It's less expensive, less restrictive than inpatient commitment or incarceration. And as you can see from the chart, it reduces homelessness, arrest, incarceration in the 70% range, and that research holds up wherever it has been used. AOT is not an alternative to community treatment. It is a way to see that the most seriously mentally ill can get into it, and we should be vigorous.
Right, you're probably wondering, where does Reason Magazine come down? Here's a video. We shut down state mental hospitals, so I want to bring them back.
On January 3rd, 1999, a man named Andrew Goldstein wandered onto this New York City subway platform and shoved a stranger named Kendra Webdale into the path of an oncoming train. With the story making national news, reporters dug into Goldstein's past and found that he had been diagnosed with schizophrenia and had a history of violent episodes. He had been in and out of psychiatric facilities, but his caretakers repeatedly released him back into the streets against their better judgment because of a shortage of available beds. The murder of Kendra Webdale brought attention to our inability to provide adequate treatment to Americans with severe mental health problems, which 20 years later...
Look, they got to go back. They got to go back to institutions. They're destroying the quality of life. They're endangering honest, law-abiding citizens. They're a danger to themselves. They got to go back into institutions.
Is still ongoing. Prisons and jails are filled with inmates exhibiting symptoms of mental illness and in need of treatment. Many of the homeless people crowding the streets of cities like Los Angeles, San Francisco, and New York are mentally ill and in need of care. And violent episodes like the murder of Kendra Webdale have brought renewed calls to bring back one of America's most controversial institutions, the mental hospital, and to entrust the state with more authority to force psychiatric care on patients against their will.
Some psychiatrists and bioethicists have proposed bring back the psychiatric hospital.
You know, in the old days, we had mental institutions, and you could nab somebody like this because, you know, they knew something was off.
The parents of mentally ill patients are among the most vocal advocates.
Right, just imagine you have a kid who's severely mentally ill and refuses treatment and just lives on the street and is a threat to themselves and to others.
Shut down all the hospitals because, we have all these medicines now and everybody can be in recovery. Well, the unfortunate fact is not everybody recovers. So where do they go?
And you're saying, wow, if we send the mentally ill back to hospital, who's going to star in our porn films? All right, that's a worthy challenge.
What do they do?
So is it time to bring back the asylum? And why did it disappear in the first place?
Mike?
Saz helped to inspire the deinstitutionalization movement that started in the 1950s and hit its...
Right, this is just one of the worst movements that we've had in this country. Right, people who need to be in institutions, instead released onto the streets.
Stride in the 60s.
The time has come for a great national effort. Nearly half of the 530,000 persons in our state mental hospitals.
Yes, Nurse Ratched at the Cuckoo's Nest would know what to do with these people. Right, we need more funding and more jobs for the Nurse Ratchets among us, the Karens. Let them get to work doing good deeds.
Are in institutions with over 3,000 patients, getting little or no individual.
All right, we need to send the crazy back to mental institutions, not because it is easy, but because it is hard.
Individual treatment. Many of these institutions have less than half of the professional staff required. 45% of them have been hospitalized for 10 years or more. If we launch a broad new health program now, it will be possible within a decade.
And within 10 months of this speech, he was dead.
To reduce the number of patients now under custodial care by up to 50%.
Mental hospitals started emptying out and closing down. But critics say deinstitutionalization was a disaster, dumping thousands of mental...
So I have friends who've gone for outpatient treatment, right? You go through a severe mental health crisis, you're otherwise, functioning, but you don't need to be put into an institution. And if you've got good insurance, right, you can get good outpatient care, and that's appropriate for people who aren't severely mentally ill, like the ones pictured in this documentary.
Mental patients onto the streets with no plan. Even Saz criticized the way deinstitutionalization unfolded.
He thought it sort of doubled the injustice that those people were not offered the choice to stay. This is their home they're being thrown out of now. So he thought that was wrong.
The number of psychiatric hospital beds available dropped by 95% between 1955 and 2005, according to the Treatment Advocacy Center. Starting in 1960, as the mental health population in hospitals declined, the number of mentally ill people in jails and prisons shot up. A 2011 Supreme Court case filed against the California Bureau of Prisons revealed that some mentally ill inmates were held in telephone booth-sized solitary cells. Some reformers say it's time to cast aside Thomas Saz and his attack on the mental health establishment.
I gotta say, Saz has been totally disproven. It's kind of like believing the church's teachings on an Earth-centric universe.
DJ Jaffe first became aware of the enormous problems in America's mental health system after his sister-in-law was diagnosed with schizophrenia, and it proved enormously challenging to get her the treatment she needed.
My sister-in-law thought that...
Right, there are two primary severe mental illnesses. There is schizophrenia, where you imagine there's far more going on around you than there really is, where you read in all sorts of motives to the people around you than is really what's powering them. So you're reading too much into reality. That's schizophrenia. Then autism is where you lack insight into what's going on with the people around you.
People across the street were talking about her. The FBI planted a transmitter in her head. There are a section of the mental health industry that believes being psychotic and delusional is a right to be protected rather than an illness to be treated. Being psychotic and delusional is not an exercise of free will, it's the inability to exercise free will, and medications can free people from the bastille of their psychosis and enable them to engage in society.
Jaffe says that Saz did offer a valid critique of overreach and overdiagnosis in the mental health industry.
There are pieces of these anti-psychiatrists which are true. When you talk about somebody with mild depression, mild ADHD, is it so abnormal as to be classified as a disorder? And we are certainly overdiagnosing and medicalizing that group.
People have gotten the sense that he had a good critique at the time, but it's sort of outmoded. It really isn't outmoded. I mean, if anything, the territory claimed by
Good challenge in the chat. Why spend money on our mentally ill where we could send that money to Ukraine?
Psychiatry is expanding more and more. Look at all the other things that are covered by the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, which is the Psychiatric Bible, right?
But when it comes to the 4% of the population that the National Institute of Mental Health carries...
Look, I have a special connection here because I used to go to a church where there are a lot of mentally retarded teenage girls who would go, and they had such crushes on me. I don't know what it is, but I just exert unbelievable, attractive powers over the mentally ill. I am like a god among the mentally challenged. I am like the Donald Trump of the mentally ill. I am like the Hawk Tour girl among the mentally retarded. The way that they would giggle and fetishize and objectify me. and how they'd want to touch me, and how they had dreams and fantasies about me. I'm not boasting. I don't know why God made me so damn attractive to mentally ill women. I plan to ask God that question one day.
Characterizes as having a serious mental illness, Jaffe says healthcare professionals need far more power to involuntarily commit patients to dedicated treatment centers.
The civil commitment law is not good enough. It basically requires someone to become danger to self or others. We should prevent people from becoming danger to self or others, not require them to become danger to self or others.
Jaffe also advocates for a policy called assisted outpatient treatment. New York passed Kendra's Law in November 1999 after Goldstein's murder of Kendra Webdale. It allows a judge to order outpatient treatment for anyone with a psychiatric diagnosis who's recently been jailed or hospitalized as a result of going untreated and who the court determines will likely deteriorate further without intervention.
And I would suggest that it is a libertarian's dream. It has lowered rates of homelessness, arrest, incarceration, needless hospitalization.
My father was also a magnet for the mentally ill. We'd have all these nutters coming around wanting to talk to my father about the final days. Now, they weren't mentally ill in the serious sense, but they were just obsessed with the time of the end. So I grew up a Seventh-day Adventist, which is a very apocalyptic religion. It's focused on the time of the end. Now, there are many healthy ways to do Seventh-day Adventism, and many of my friends grew up in homes that were quite healthy in the way those homes did Seventh-day Adventism. Still, almost everyone that I grew up with in the Seventh-day Adventist church left the church. Like, virtually everyone that I grew up with at Avondale College left the church. But there were just all these nutters just always wanting to come around the house. We didn't have a telephone for years and years, because my dad didn't want to be bothered by people calling to talk to him about the time of the end. And finally, he succumbed to getting a telephone in some point in 1978 or 79, because people would just drive up to where we lived at Pacific Union College and hunt my father down to talk about the last days.
In the 70% range for the most seriously mentally ill. And from a libertarian perspective, they maintain more of their freedoms than the alternatives, which are inpatient commitment or incarceration. This idea that we should just abandon the seriously mentally ill who don't recognize their need for treatment serves neither the liberty interest of the individual, the financial interest of society, or the interests of trying to keep the public safe.
When you're trying to get help for someone, especially for Misty, who didn't feel like she needed help, it's very, very difficult.
Linda Mayo, who lives in Modesto, California, has been advocating for the enactment of Laura's Law in her home county. She's the mother of twin daughters, both with severe mental illnesses, and it's through their experiences that she became an advocate for strengthening the involuntary commitment and compulsory treatment laws.
It's not a panacea. It's not going to help everyone. But the people who refuse treatment and consistently refuse treatment, and who are in and out of the hospital, in and out of jail, homeless, suicidal, it can help.
So there was one parent who was just, one mother who was just so impressive in a call to the Dennis Prager show about 15 years ago about a hard time. Her child was going through a hard time. And she said about her child, "I didn't break him and I can't fix him." That's just such a healthy attitude for our relationships with other people. There have been people who've come on this show and said things that they came to regret, but I didn't break those people and I can't fix them. And we've all bruised people in our interactions with others. We've damaged people. We should obviously take account of the things that we've done, and where possible make amends. But in the final analysis, very few of us have the ability to destroy other people, and very few of us have the ability to then go fix someone. So what the heck is going on with Iran?
In the past 14 months, we have had a lot of podcast conversations about Iran. But I'd say, admittedly, we've been evaluating Iran from the outside in and trying to understand just how they're thinking about their foreign policy options. And you have dedicated your career to understanding Iran from the inside out. And I think that one of the most interesting questions on the minds of world leaders, geopolitical experts, the media following events of the last several months is, what are Iran's leaders thinking? How are they evaluating this new environment that they have, this new landscape? Now that their security doctrine, their proxy system seems to, for the first time really in a long time, be, I don't say it's collapsed, but it is collapsing potentially, and at a minimum looks fragile and under threat. So I want to get a sense for how you think, at least, their thinking may be evolving. I want to start with asking you, as a researcher and an expert on Iranian society and politics, what is the most important thing that you think we in the West don't get about Iran, and that we don't get about how Iranian leaders and the regime perceives itself?
Well, there are 90 million Iranians in Iran, so they think differently about different things. But when it comes to perception, I think that perhaps the most important thing to understand about Iran is that there seems to be a paradox between the way they perceive themselves as former empire, which deserves the right to be recognized as at least a regional power in the Middle East, and the fact that they're surrounded, or at least they think they're surrounded by threats and challenges. You know, I was once told about a Western journalist who went to Iran, and she got into a taxi, and the driver asked her, "Where are you from?" And she said, "I'm from Rome." And she said, "Oh," and he told her, "Oh, you're from Rome. Well, never forget that both Rome and Iran used to be empires." On the other hand, I have to tell you that when I was working almost a year ago on my research on Iranian involvement in the Middle East, I read a lot of papers published and articles published by the Imam Hussein University, which is affiliated with Revolutionary Guards. And I read their perception about the region and about the so-called Zionist threats. And it amazed me that they think about Israel more or less the same as Israel thinks about Iran. As a country surrounded by enemies, they were kept saying that the Zionist regime tries to encircle Iran from northern Iraq, from the Persian Gulf. It goes back to the Iran-Iraq war. In Persian, in Farsi, Iran-Iraq war is called Jang Tahmili, the war which was imposed on Iran.
Describe the mood and discourse inside Iran during the first few months after October 7th, and then compare them to now. And I say now, following the fall of Assad, the crippling of Hezbollah, the crippling of, if not complete evisceration of Hamas. Can you describe what was and what is now?
Yeah, I think that one of the most interesting things is to see the change, the very significant change between the mood or the state of mind in Iran in the days or weeks or even months after October the 7th and what's going on in recent weeks and months. Because at the beginning of the war, following October the 7th, there was the sense in Iran that this is an historical moment. For the first time, and we will speak later on about the surprise in Iran from October the 7th, but still there was a sense that this was an historical moment in which finally Iran and the pro-Iranian axis in the region, the so-called axis of resistance, got a chance to implement the ideological vision of getting rid of Israel.
All right, let's see what Mark Halperin had to say. This is from 90 minutes ago.
Castellanos, to take your questions. And if you're here on the stock market, and there's some truth to that, but Donald Trump does the thing. And all the reporting all of us have seen since then is our characterization of how much he loved the whole thing is true. The New York Times I wrote two pieces about the thing, and they talked about it, it was like a 1980s event with Time Magazine and the stock market, and there's some truth to that. But Donald Trump does care a lot about magazine covers, and he does care a lot about the stock market. So those are not vestiges of a bygone era, at least not for him. A bunch of stuff happened today. I would say if you want to see things through the prism of good for Trump, not good for Trump, I would say mixed bag. But a lot of good stuff for him. And the momentum continues, and the Democrats in disarray, which is something Republicans and sometimes the media say that the Democrats don't like. I'd say Democrats remain at least somewhat in disarray. All right, let's run through some stuff. The Time Magazine interview is chock-a-block full of interesting things. Our friends at Axios highlighted the same things I did, so rather than make up our own graphic, we're just going to steal something from Axios. So if you could put up number 2, please. Now, here's the thing. Most president-elects in an interview with Time Magazine, like you'd parse what they'd say and you say, well, that's what he means. That's carefully chosen, and those they take it to the bank, stone tablets down from on high. I'm going to read through these things that he said, but it's Donald Trump. So I'm not really sure why I'm even going to read them to you, because tomorrow he could say something else. But in any event, January 6th pardons. He says he's going to pardon a lot of them, maybe almost everyone. And it's going to happen maybe within the first 9 minutes of his term. I do think he's going to pardon some of them, but is he going to pardon almost everyone? And will it happen in the first 9 minutes? I don't know, maybe. Abortion pills, he's not going to ban them. And that's, as he pointed out, what he said during the campaign. So that's not new, but it's a reaffirmation. And again, he could change his mind. So the fact that he reaffirmed is interesting. Vaccines, going to have a big discussion about vaccines. That is very Trumpian. Big discussion might not mean a thing. May not even have the big discussions, but may not make a change. And then I think we mentioned this morning, says he wants to keep the Senate filibuster. That's significant because there was some thought that he might try to make John Thune, or at least urge John Thune to go where Mitch McConnell would not, and get rid of the filibuster. And then I think Democrats maybe be hardened by that, because some of them had predicted that he would go to get rid of the filibuster. All right, so that's the time interview. Good news for Donald Trump, at least on the margins. Go to graphic number 1, please. I believe this is the first Democratic senator on the record supporting a Trump cabinet nominee. Now, this is a little bit of a homer. This is Tammy Baldwin of Wisconsin endorsing Sean Duffy for Transportation Secretary, her fellow Badger. So I'm not sure how significant that is, but it ain't nothing. And you can see those are two people getting along quite well. And I don't know if she's doing it out of personal loyalty or home state pride, or maybe she thinks this will bring more federal highway money to Wisconsin. Who knows? But mark it down. The Democrats are not going to vote in lockstep against every Trump nominee. Now, on the question of Premier Xi, I like calling him Premier Xi. I think it's funny. Premier Xi of China was invited to the inauguration. Go to number 4, please. But according to Jennifer Jacobs, the great new political reporter at CBS, who has a storied and fabled career in the media, my friend Jennifer, he's not expected to come to the inauguration. It is also, the inauguration is the first day of Davos, an event he has been to in the past, I believe. So maybe he was already planning Davos. This mystery that we sort of stumbled on this morning of why don't foreign dignitaries come, heads of state, heads of government, come to the American inauguration, president's inauguration, when we send delegations to, supermarket openings in these other countries. We haven't gotten to the bottom of it yet. And Sean rolled his eyes at having Michael Beschloss on, but I'm hoping Lori can book some historian sometime soon, because I want to get to the bottom of it. It seems very odd. All right. Now, okay. A lot of conversation in the media about the media, and in politics about the media. We've talked about it here, at least on occasion. And that New York Times DealBook thing that was like a week ago, they just keep on spooling different parts of it. And I know a lot of people here like to talk about the media. So here's a soundbite about the media from a very wise man, a man I have great admiration and affection for, Mr. Van Jones, ladies and gentlemen.
Come on, man. I'm trying to run a show here. I don't have time for this kind of substandard production.
For suspending his door-knocking campaign and letting Charlie Kirk and Elon do a bunch of stuff online. We said, these guys are idiots. These guys are stupid. Then you start knocking on these doors. You know what people come to the door with? Their phone in their hand. They're in a 24-hour digital surround sound that has nothing to do with CNN, has nothing to do with any stuff that we do. I asked I got a teenage son, I asked him, who are the most influential people in the world today? I'm thinking to myself, he's going to say Barack Obama, Oprah Winfrey, Jay-Z. He says, chastened, Aiden Ross, Jinxie, and Sketch. I don't know who he's talking about. I said, what platforms are you on? He goes, I'm on Twitch, Kick, and Rumble. I said, that sounds like you need to go to the hospital. What are these platforms? I'm telling you guys, the mainstream has become fringe, and the fringe has become mainstream. There are platforms, there are people out there that are getting 14 million streams, and we're on cable news getting 1 or 2 million. And so there is a whole world out there. Kellyanne Conway, I hate to agree with her, but I do a lot of times. Donald Trump understood that and we didn't. And it's not just Democrats who don't. The entire political class is way off, way off, way off.
Van Jones is an incredible speaker. I mean, he just seems like such a great guy, and he's on the left.
All right. He said a lot of stuff there I didn't understand, but some stuff I understood. Matthew Bartlett, who you see here on screen, one thing Matthew likes to do during the programs is bombard me with information, and it's 98% helpful. I don't want to be peevish and single out the 2%, but 98% helpful. So, first of all, I love Van, and we'll talk about that clip. I love Van, but I don't like, I say respectfully, I don't like when people say, I hate to agree with so-and-so. That's antithetical to how I think we should be talking in America as we're trying to get along. And
Sorry.
Peaceful and understanding. Like you should say, I'm delighted that I agree with Kellyanne. Not I hate to agree with Kellyanne. The other joke I hate is when the conservative is sitting on the left of the liberal, and they say, I find myself in the unusual position of being to the left. Hate that joke. Hate it as much as when you're on the elevator and somebody says, oh, we got the local. Hate that joke too. Heard it a lot. Not funny anymore. All right, so Mr. Matthew Bartlett, who, by the way, is the one who told me when Davos started. Paul Begala, the Democratic strategist, has a rule. If you steal somebody else's joke in a public speech or on TV, the first time you steal it, you have to say, as my friend Matthew Bartlett says, ha ha ha, tell the joke. The second time you say, as one of my friends says, and the third time you tell it, you just steal it. Now, every time I tell that story, I credit Paul Begala violating his own rule, but it's a good rule to live by. Mr. Bartlett sent me a tweet and said, Fetterman all in on Elise Stefanik yesterday. He didn't endorse her. He said nice things about her, but I don't believe he committed to endorse her. So Matthew Bartlett, I put that in the 2%. But this is a good one. This is a good one. We know Donald Trump's going to the Army-Navy game. We believed that Ron DeSantis is going to the Army-Navy game. But guess who else the Washington Post is reporting is going to the Army-Navy game? Anybody want to guess? A fellow by the name of Pete Hegseth. So that's going to be interesting to see who sits with Donald Trump at the game.
This New York Times panel, the 2024 election, what happened, what next? There's a lot of good moments. It happened a week ago, but it was only put online yesterday.
No one predicted would be as successful as they were.
Van Jones.
Look, I think winning the midterms cost us because it gave a false sense of confidence to Joe Biden and to a lot of D.C. Democrats. Most people in the party didn't feel that way. People were shocked that Biden wanted to run again and disappointed, and the polls showed it immediately. It wasn't like there was some big mystery about that. Look, this is a party that loves Joe Biden. Loves Joe Biden. You never hear people talk about a politician with as much love as they do, but people were disappointed that he decided to run again. And the red wave didn't show up in the midterms, but it sure showed up later. I also just want to say stuff we were talking about before. Look, man, people are scared, Jason. I mean, you're very confident in President Trump, and I appreciate your confidence. I got people who are literally terrified because people take the things that he says seriously when he says he's coming after folks. Every one of the people who just mentioned are people who are hiring lawyers, people who are thinking about leaving the country. And so if he didn't mean it, then I wish he would come out and say that. And I hope you tell him to do that. And there's also been reporting, he didn't go after Hillary Clinton, but there's been reporting that he did go after John Kerry and others. He was being restrained. So just understand there is a level of concern on this side. The last thing I just want to say is that, there's a reckoning inside the Democratic Party. Kamala Harris promised us freedom. Well, she delivered it to us because now we're free from having to run anything in Washington, D.C. That's not what we were signing up for. It's what we got. And I hope the party takes a chance to look at the fact that we pushed all our rebels out of this party. We had a rebellion in our party in 2016. It was called Bernie Sanders. You had a rebellion in your party in 2016. It was called Donald Trump. Your rebel won. Our rebel lost. And then since then, the rebels in our party have been pushed out. RFK was a rebel inside of our party. He wanted to run against Joe Biden fair and square. The DNC wouldn't let him. Pushed him out. You can walk down the list. Don't forget, Elon Musk was a Andrew Yang Democrat 4 years ago. He's out. You can walk down the list. Joe Rogan was very favorable toward Michelle Obama. He was a Bernie guy. He's out. So there's something that's happened in this party where the rebels in this party no longer feel like they have a place. And we've got to be able to talk about that stuff honestly. I love Joe Biden. Joe Biden picked me out of the puppy pile and gave me a chance to be to work with you guys. I love him. He should have walked away and let other people in this party step up to the bat. He didn't, and paid the price.
Van and Alexis Miguel Johnson, just answer a question of how.
Every podcast, they talk to every person, and Joe Biden and Kamala Harris didn't.
But isn't that a different point, Sarah? I mean, there's a point.
I got called on 15 minutes ago. I'm just saying.
Van, hang on just one second. I just want to address that though, because I do want John Carl to speak to this, and Major and Margaret after Dan talks. But we're getting a little behind here. The issue of the media approach is actually a really important one.
Yeah.
The issue of the issues, immigration and coronavirus, which we haven't even discussed yet, and I want to get to. But Van, please make your point.
Okay, so look, guys. A lot of the stuff we're doing is the same stuff we do all the time. Right. We got a chance to talk real here. I want to talk real. You guys shouldn't be as happy as you are because 2016 people voted for change because they were fed up and sick of it and gave Trump a chance. 2020 people voted for change because they were sick of Trump. 2024 they voted for change. They're probably going to vote for change a bunch more times because something is off, man. There's something really going wrong for real everyday working folks in this country. And I'm not sure either party has an answer yet. We know how to beat each other up when the other one's in power. But can we solve any of these problems? My perspective doesn't come from the focus groups. It doesn't come from sitting on CNN next to my beloved Anderson Cooper. I was on the ground supporting folks in Philadelphia, trying to get folks to vote. I was trying to help Jewish voters get to the polls in the Philly suburbs. And I'm telling you, we are way off. The entire political class is way off. First of all, digital is a new door knocking. You got to understand that. We were laughing our butts off at Donald Trump for suspending his door-knocking campaign and letting Charlie Kirk and Elon do a bunch of stuff online. We said, these guys are idiots. These guys are stupid. Then you start knocking on these doors. You know what people come to the door with? Their phone. in their hand. They're in a 24-hour digital surround to do a lot of times. Donald Trump understood that and we didn't. And it's not just Democrats that don't. The entire political class is way off, way off, way off. And I'm going to tell you something else. Men are hurting, man. Men are hurting. And the feminist culture tells you, don't cry because you're the problem anyway. And the masculinist culture tells you, don't cry because boys don't cry. So you just aren't able to talk about how scared you are you can't provide for anybody. You can't talk about how scared you are that you don't understand your kids.
There's a great documentary out about yacht rock, and yacht rock is all about men being raw and honest and vulnerable with their emotions. So listen to some yacht rock, reconnect with your feelings and your vulnerability, and watch this HBO documentary, Yacht Rock.
And what's going to happen to them? You can't talk about anything. So at least Donald Trump lets you have an emotion besides shame. And so, guys, we can sit up here all day long and do this talking point gumbo stuff that we do, but I'm telling you right now, you guys are going to be in trouble next. Because until somebody fixes these problems for real people, there is a rebellion in this country, and anybody who comes out and sounds like they aren't pulling their talking point out of Cracker Jack box will get a hearing, whether they're right, wrong, or otherwise.
All right, hang on one sec. Margaret Hoover.
Van Jones is just a terrific speaker. I mean, he really feels like he's coming from the heart.
We, over the last 10 years or so, really the last 4 election cycles, the acceleration of this has just become serious.
I don't want to go quick. I want to go as long as Kellyanne. I got a lot to say. So look, I think that you're talking about something that's important for this party. Both of these parties are hypocritical. You have the Republican Party, that's the party of Lincoln. It's a party of, in its own mind, it's a radical anti-slavery party. It's a party of individual rights and individual dignity. And they have a bunch of white nationalists running around in there. That's a problem. Our party is supposed to be the party of FDR and working folks. But if you don't eat kale and go to yoga classes, you can't go to most of these meetings. And so that's a problem. So you have two parties that have fundamental hypocrisies built into them. We thought that their hypocrisy was going to blow them up. We thought that playing with all these crazy people was going to blow up, but it's our hypocrisy that blew us up. And so rather than sitting up here and trying to defend everything, I think it's an opportunity, because most people listen to this, New York Times, they're our people. So look, there's a bunch of stuff we did wrong. You touched one of them. People hurting economically, and we kept trying to tell them that, we're building cathedrals for them in 20 years with this Inflation Reduction Act. It didn't work. We also ran people out of our party on crypto. 50 million people bought some crypto. That's a bet on a future. They are trying to get to a better future. Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, Elizabeth Warren, beating the hell out of crypto, beating the hell out of Silicon Valley people was not smart. Not inviting Elon Musk to the White House when you're doing an EV day because he doesn't have union workers was not smart. You're pushing people out of the party. That's a mistake. People are concerned about the health of their children. We used to own that. Michelle Obama owned that. We gave that up. RFK starts talking about it. He's a nut. There's a lot of people after COVID, a lot of our folks, suburban housewives and other folks who are very concerned. We could have talked about the issue. We didn't. We're pushing people out of this party. And the last thing I'll say is, I hate all these people, the anti-woke, the anti-this, the anti-that, but you got to look in the mirror at a certain point. We've had 5 movements in a row in our party that rely on dehumanizing binaries, where you're putting down some people to lift somebody else up. I love all our movements, but there's a moral flaw when every movement's got to put somebody down. Black Lives Matter, all white people are racist. That is not going to work. Okay. No, hold on a second. That is in fact a part of the ideology that subconsciously there's unconscious bias. And the way that lands, though, for people is you're calling them names. There's got to be a better way to say it. You walk through all of our movements. You look at Bernie. I love Bernie. All billionaires are evil. Everybody, 99% is a victim. Oprah Winfrey's a billionaire. She's not evil.
But ultimately, it's on those future leaders of the Democratic Party, and the bench was deeper than it had been for a long time, not to ultimately step in and say, I'm going to take him on. Nobody stepped forward to take him on, and that's the question the Democrats have to ask. But it's not whether or not Biden should have dropped out first, but why nobody, other than Bobby Kennedy, Marianne Williamson,
Dean Phillips.
None of these major figures, the governors, came forward and said, I'm going to take on Joe Biden.
But there was something else going on at the time. There were articles where Democrats were saying, please dump Kamala Harris from the ticket, change your vice president. That's a parlor game that's played every time there's an incumbent president who's eligible to run for a second term. But let's all be honest, and Van Jones and I talked about this at Milken Institute in early May. Let's be honest. Part of the reason that President Biden could not step aside is people didn't have confidence in the competence of Kamala Harris. And then all of a sudden, we're supposed to believe that she has worked hard. She does speak well. The American people saw it differently. And I'm glad, I'm relieved to hear that very few lessons, it sounds like, have been learned by my Democratic colleagues.
I'll get my time.
I hear yours, but let me just say this. Maggie, I think that this election was also about moments that Donald Trump has this sense of the culture. He just gloms onto a cultural zeitgeist and leads it. So I think him, rather than banning TikTok like Joe Biden did and Kamala Harris did, by extension, he got on it. And Forbes magazine wrote an article maybe 2 weeks ago, tops, saying of the 10 top TikToks of 2024, 8 came from the Trump campaign, 5 in the last week alone. So he's in the garbage truck, he's at McDonald's. You're watching Joe Rogan live, but then other people are watching it through TikTok. He goes to East Palestine before any official in the Biden-Harris administration, before the Secretary of Transportation, before the sitting senior senator, now the ex-senator of Ohio, Sherrod Brown. And he's honoring the police officer who's slain in Massapequa, New York, on Long Island, while Bill Clinton, Barack Obama, and Joe Biden are all at Radio City Music Hall at a fundraiser. He beats Kamala Harris to Georgia and North Carolina, where people are in pain, where everything that they've had and loved ones have been washed away, literally, and Kamala Harris in San Francisco at a fundraiser. So people see this. They know what they see, they know what they hear, and I think the big distinction in this last election, two I'll say quickly. One was the Democrats would have won if they got away with convincing Americans to believe what the Democrats told them was real and true and authentic, rather than what they saw with their own eyes and heard with their own ears, what was real and true and authentic. Everything from a sitting president's obvious mental and physical lack of acuity, agility, ability, but even the vice president, whose official schedule that they stopped publishing a while ago had little to nothing on it most weekends and then most days. So you can't just, you can't create a candidate out of somebody who is going to eat and own all of these things. The second thing I want to say is, very quickly, I listened for 26 minutes, very quickly, is that putting Harris on the ticket, I think, also sealed Biden's fate, and him thinking that he was FDR, hanging out with John Meacham, and instead of realizing you're here to be the post-COVID caretaker, you're here after George Floyd's murder. The idea that he was going to govern as Bernie Sanders, who had already been pushed out of the party as somebody who beat Hillary Clinton, folks, in 23 contests. That's a real primary opponent. And this is the election where Americans are saying, no more. You are not going to pigeonhole and narrowcast me and tell me what to think, for whom to vote, and how to feel based on my age, my gender, my race, my sexual orientation, my religion, my political party registration, my past voting behavior. And whether it's Ann Seltzer's phony poll or phony focus groups of junk saying that Kamala Harris is going to win, attacking people like Kevin McCarthy. Thank you so much for having the courage in 2022, you and President Trump, and the RNC, to have run these candidates in California and New York, because without that, we would not have had the majority in the House of Representatives. You had the courage to go into blue states and go into purple districts and do that. I think they misread the mandate, Maggie, in 2022 of the midterm. A lot of those terrible candidates fell short. They should have. They weren't great candidates. But the Republicans won 3 million more of the popular vote than the Democrats. They misread a mandate for Joe Biden, who wasn't even invited on the campaign trail. They sent out Barack Obama, not Joe Biden, to campaign for candidates. So you've got to, we have to level set with the public and stop pretending that these counties didn't flip. And last point, every state,
how many last points you gonna do?
I got this. Well, they're all good ones. I'm not here spinning. They're really great points, and I'm not here spinning and pretending that this election. A lot of this conversation, respectfully, sounds like the election didn't happen yet. We talked about the same stuff over and over again. The fact is this: I said it a year ago. I'll say it again because it was just raised. The Democratic Party right now, every day they wake up, it's still January 6, 2021 on the calendar. They get an electric vehicle. They get an abortion. You're out of touch with the public. This election was a rejection of wokeness, and every state went more red except Nebraska and Washington State. That is a sweep. That is a mandate. That is President Trump coming into office and the American people saying, please make my life safer, more secure, more affordable. Please get us out of these foreign engagements. And I think the always wrong, never Trumpers, who had unlimited money, cost the Democratic Party, which they say they're not even a member, another presidential election.
Van, hang on one second. I'm going to let Sarah Long.
Okay, that was good.
Oh, and Twitter is all a Twitter over my sitting in Sean's seat, so that's good because that was the main purpose. One of the best episodes, or best moments in the history of the TV show Friends, was when they walked into Central Perk and someone was sitting on the couch. Love that. And I'm hoping Sean walks in and tries to reclaim his seat during the show, because that could go, as the kids say, viral. Noah, have we run through all the elements? There are elements that I haven't gotten to yet? I think that's it, right? I think you're not allowed to smoke a cigar in your own home in Manhattan, so don't even try it.
Good point.
Gentlemen, welcome in. I'm going to add Matthew because it's a cigar episode. First, I want to talk about one of Alex's favorite people, AOC. Dan has an addendum. This morning, yes. Dan was like, AOC is going to be ranking member on that committee. Take it to the bank. Done deal. Done and dusted. Goose is cooked. Whatever. Dan, what would you like to say now about AOC being ranking member? What's the name of that committee?
Yes, government oversight.
Government and oversight, or government oversight.
I revised,
what are you saying now?
Yes, I revise and amend my remarks. Rule number 1 of any Democratic House election: check with Nancy Pelosi's office first, which I very much failed to do. And it is now being reported that she is actively whipping for Jerry Conley in trying to defeat AOC, which is stunning because if she wins, obviously that is a heck of a statement. I mean, if Pelosi, pulls this out, and if she doesn't, that will be a huge statement that AOC can count votes. So somebody's
What do
wrong.
So Nancy Pelosi, as far as we know, hasn't been involved in these other leadership contests with her old friends being challenged by her new friends. So is this her animus towards the squad? What would you speculate, or what do you know about why she's activating on this?
I mean, when AOC first got there, she did not play ball with the rest of the caucus. She wouldn't pay dues. She attacked other members. There is no better way to get under Pelosi's skin as a new member than to not shut your mouth, learn the way of the House, build relationships, and kind of earn your status, earn your chips. When people show up, she likes workhorses, not show horses. And she got on the wrong side of the speaker very quickly. And so, it could be. But to your point, like the Congressional Black Caucus is not standing in the way of David Scott being defeated. In fact, they've actually said like they're not going to weigh in. So, it's a big deal.
All right.
And Mark,
yes,
welcome
Alex.
to the future of the Democratic Party. When you have an election and a little bit of the center moves to the other side, what's left just by nature is just a little more intense and more activist and more radical. Here's war number one. We're seeing AOC. So if you're holding your breath for the Democratic Party to learn a big lesson from the election, and hey, we're going to moderate and move to the center, this may not.
Alex, you've skipped the show for several days, not really sure why, but you've missed me making that point. I think they're a bigger mess than people realize right now, and I don't think the DNC chair race is necessarily going to solve it. All right, I'm in Sean's house. As best I can tell, there's nobody here. I'm going to give his stuff away. We're going to have cash prize, well, not cash prizes, prizes. Sandalwood and vanilla candle. You three gentlemen are eligible to win. Press your imaginary buzzer. Just go bzzz when you know the answer to this question, okay? Ready? I'm going to read you a list. You tell me, what is this a list of? Ready? What is this a list of? Washington, D.C., Prince George's County, Maryland, Petersburg, Virginia, Baltimore, Maryland, Clayton County, Georgia, Oglawa, Lakota County, South Dakota, Kalawao County, Hawaii, Claiborne County, Mississippi. None of you know. Matthew, I got to unmute you because otherwise we're not going to hear your buzzer. I'm going to read it really fast again. What is this a list of? Washington, D.C., Prince George's County, Maryland, Petersburg, Virginia, Baltimore, Maryland, Clayton County, Georgia, Oglawa, Lakota County, South Dakota, Kalawao County, Hawaii. I'm sorry if I mispronounced that. And Claiborne County, Mississippi. No one knows. What we were looking for.
Shift to Republicans?
Good guess.
The last Democratic districts in America.
Well, you're both basically right. They're Kamala Harris's best counties, where she got upwards of 83% of the vote in those 8 counties. So the candle's safe. The candle's safe till we get to the next question. All right. Alex was a big proponent during the campaign of the notion that through photo ops and other messaging devices that Donald Trump could be reimagined and thought of in a new way. And we talked about this morning, the photo op at the exchange, not just on the bell ringing, but when he went down on the floor with J.D. Vance, it was the thing. So presidents do photo ops, lame ducks do fewer of them. Alex, how do you see the Trump presidency using those same kind of photo ops?
I think Trump governs from the outside in. Biden governs from the inside out. Create policy, then figure out a way to support it. Let's de-escalate. Okay, then go sell that. Trump doesn't do that. He is the outsider. And I think it's a difference between a leader and a manager. And whether it's policy or nominees, you're seeing Trump build momentum for both outside. And so these photo ops are another vehicle for him to do that. And, it's a Reagan style kind of outsider thing. He's the advocate of change. That means he's young. It means he's new. That means he's outsider, and he's photo bombing Washington.
Dan, I can think of very little Democrats can do to counteract this, except look for little nitpicking things like one of the people he shook hands with, with the Capitol on January 6th. How do you think the Democratic Party is worried about these things, or they just think they're stupid photo ops, or what?
I think they think it's a honeymoon, and I think, as I mentioned this morning, I think once he is sworn in and everything is on his plate and everything is his responsibility, foreign and domestic, they will have opportunities to get back on offense and criticize. If he pardons, a January 6th person who harmed a police officer, there is an opportunity there to speak up, right? So I think they will have their
So what did they get wrong?
Moments.
I mean, if
they're trying to figure things out right now, I think they're trying.
Okay, back to what's going on with
Because
Iran.
if you extrapolate out what you're saying, this helped shape Iranian security doctrine more broadly. The idea that, wait a minute, Israel's 15 months after October 7th, they're still in a war. And not only they're in a war, they're not worn down, but actually it's in the later months of this war that Israel's actually on offense and systematically taking out Iranian proxies and even really threatening, Iran itself, the regime. So what did they get wrong? Like, what was the miscalculation?
So I think the first they certainly underestimated the Israeli capabilities. Certainly after October the 7th, they really believed that Israel is collapsing, that Israel is declining. That was their historical vision. I mean, you might remember the speech given by Khamenei in 2015, where he said that by the year 2040, in 25 years, Israel is going to be gone. Israel is not going to survive the next 25 years, not just due to the confrontation with the so-called axis of resistance, but also because of Israeli domestic internal weakness. So they certainly underestimated the capabilities of Israel, and I think they also overestimated both the axis capabilities and their own. I think that what happened in recent years was that due to the development of ballistic missiles and drones and the progress made in Iran's nuclear program, they got the sense in Tehran that finally they managed to compensate for their military conventional weakness. There were even assessments, by the way, not just in Iran, even in Israel, saying that there was a sense of self-confidence in Iran. There was a sense of we can do whatever we want because we have finally reached a kind of strategic balance with Israel. I think we can't explain, for example, the first and then the second Iranian direct attack against Israel in April, if you don't get this. But what happened during the last, I would say 1 year or even before the war, was that they got the sense of self-confidence, even hubris in a way, due to their assessment that Israel is becoming more and more weakened, Iran and its partners and proxies become more and more stronger, and that enables Iran to make decisions which in the past were unacceptable or considered to be too risky.
Okay. Roz, this now begs the question how vulnerable the Iranian regime is today. There was lots of speculation and analysis that it was vulnerable due to popular unrest within Iran over the last several years, combined with a very weakened Iranian economy. But there wasn't this sense that Iran, the regime, was overstretched in the region. If anything, it had a lot of support and redundancy and built into its reach within the region, including especially due to these proxies that it had. How vulnerable is the regime today?
The Iranian regime is very vulnerable, but I think one has to explain this vulnerability not just due to the recent developments in the region, not just to the impact of the recent Israeli attack against Iran, which certainly managed to hit Iran's aerial defense and expose Iran's vulnerability to Israeli military force, and not just because of the recent developments in the pro-Iranian axis, but also because of domestic issues. Now, on the one hand, I would say the Iranian regime, in my view, suffers from a major crisis of legitimacy. Most assessments, including my own, is that the Iranian regime does not enjoy more than 20-25% support from the Iranian population. Due to the fact that for many years, the Iranian regime has not delivered solutions to most problems shared by the Iranian population, either the economic crisis, which is just terrible, inflation of over 40%, huge budget deficit, lack of economic growth, in addition to a growing gap between the younger generation in Iran, the second and third generation of Iran, and the Iranian regime, the Islamic Republic of Iran. You can see that. You could see that during the recent elections in Iran, the presidential elections, in which even the concern of many Iranians that someone as radical, as hardliner, as Saeed Jalili will win the elections, even that did not encourage more than 45 or 47% of the Iranian population to come and vote. So they certainly have to face this crisis of legitimacy. But I would say that when you look at the power, I would say, relations between the regime on the one side and the protest movement on the other side, as we all saw during the 22-23 Mahsa Amini's protest, I still believe that the Iranian regime enjoys significant coherence. They still are very much determined to fight for their lives in case if they see that necessarily. They look at what happened in Syria, and I think one of the major differences, at least for now, between Syria and Iran is that the Syrian regime and the Syrian army seems to have lost its vitality. We saw that wherever the rebels arrived, the Syrian army retreated. The Revolutionary Guards are still very much loyal to the regime. They are still very much dependent on the regime. They know that if the regime is gone, they're going to go as well. On the other hand, when you see the protest movement in Iran, or the so-called dissidents, against the regime, they still don't have the ability to do two things. One is to mobilize millions of Iranians to go to the streets and call for a regime change. And the second thing, which I think is a very big weakness of the Iranian protest movement, is that they have not yet come up with a coalition of sectors or forces within the Iranian society working together, teachers and students and middle class and workers and ethnic minorities. They didn't manage to work together in order to bring the regime change in Iran. So as long as those problems are not solved, I don't think, and I'm not sure there is an immediate threat to the stability of the regime, despite the fact that they certainly suffer from vulnerability, economic crisis.
So the overwhelming media consensus and elite foreign policy consensus 6 months ago was there's no way that Israel could remake the Middle East. Well, it sure appears as though Israel has made incredible progress towards remaking the Middle East in alignment with its own interests, and very probably in alignment with America's interests as well. Now, how vulnerable is the Iranian regime? That's something worth keeping an eye on.
Once he does, it'll be a new day.
Matthew, what do you think?
You know, I think it's interesting that Trump ran the most disciplined campaign that he's run. He's also looking, to be a rather disciplined president, at least right now. He's not doing these long, rambling press conferences, which arguably give Democrats more ammo than maybe even they help himself. And yeah, you have time and everything. It seems that everybody's taking a deep breath in both parties as we navigate, what the future may look like.
And Mark, one other thing is we saw big money spent this election. The old Wall Street, old billionaire class went with Kamala Harris. New money, new tech billionaire went with Trump. Here's Trump going back to Wall Street, to the establishment. We used to have country club Republicans. Now we have country club Democrats. Here's Trump reaching across the 50-yard line in effect. He's got momentum. He's building momentum, and it's going to be harder, to Dan's point, it's going to be harder to pick off one or two or three of these players if the whole team is building momentum, not just for a team, but for policy too.
What do you guys think of, it looks like, according to Jennifer Jacobs, he's not coming. What do you think of inviting Chairman Xi, Premier Xi, to the inauguration? Good move, bad move, doesn't matter? What?
I think it's great symbolism.
Classic Trump move, right? Take an enemy, demagogue. We're going to go to economic decoupling with China. By the way, come on over and see it firsthand. So always a wild card in terms of the foreign policy negotiations, the leveraging, the showmanship.
The media has currently towards Trump. Certainly they'll turn on him as quick as they can, but do you get the sense they're acting a little chastened, defanged? What, if anything, do you see?
My guess is that some of it is economic incentives. There's been a little bit of a wake-up call that, hey, there's
Republicans buy sneakers too, as Michael Jordan said.
Yeah, I think some of it is that. But some of it, we've been here before, we've seen this story arc, is whom the gods would destroy, they would first make great. And, you hug them, you elevate them, and then you come in with the knife later. So trust no one.
Matthew?
Yeah, no, I think
my friend Mark Halperin.
Yeah.
But he wasn't, there's room in between Fox and MSNBC. And when a lot of voters this year woke up and just found that they had been lied to about Joe Biden's mental capabilities by people like the establishment media and CNN, it doesn't just warm MAGA's heart.
Yeah,
I think to
right.
hear.
You're right. That's a horrible error that I've made. I'm going to ask you to forgive me. No, I'm serious. You're right. Because I ridicule people for making that mistake when they say Trump's immigration policies for super MAGA, etc. Bashing the media, not just for super MAGA. You're absolutely
Well, and by the way, the New York Times had a pretty big story about the immigration problem. I mean, 3.5 years late, but that's another sign of the news media kind of coming around.
100%.
But then the New York Times has this story, the loser story. How about every Trump nominee lost an election?
Yeah. Well, and they also have a story about Tiffany's father-in-law. They're gearing back up, but they should, right? There should be scrutiny. It just shouldn't be tendentious and biased. Jamie Nelson, welcome in. Thank you for
citizens from illegal aliens who are committing crime, like a Lake and Riley. You're not protecting our folks who are dying of drug overdose. And my biggest thing is these children missing at the border. The report that came out in September, that was heartbreaking. Human trafficking to me is just so wrong. And I don't think anyone on these calls that I've listened to, I think both sides can agree that that is not okay. And the fact that the media decided that they were more interested in protecting Joe Biden and the Democratic Party than they were protecting the citizens and the children. I don't care where these children are from. They need to be protected. And we know that, I mean, I saw the Congress, there was one of the
basic job, as you said it. And I'd say running parallel to that, the exact same dynamic is the president's cognitive decline. Same thing. Public interest, completely.
The damage that's been done, they're going to report every day. It's going to be a heartless, as Trump said, you know, they're going to have all these stories the next 4 years that they would not report on the last 4. And so to me, that's a disservice to us as citizens and to humanity when you're not willing to report on something that needs to be rectified.
Yeah.
So that
I wish every journalist, every executive producer, every news executive, every reporter who covers the administration could hear what you just said, and brilliantly and well expressed. Fundamental failure of people in my business to do the most basic job, as you said it. And I'd say running parallel to that, the exact same dynamic is the president's cognitive decline. Same thing. Public interest completely ignored in a conspiracy of silence, without thinking about the public interest, simply thinking, well, we can't let Donald Trump win again. So we certainly, and in both cases, the policies and practices of the Democratic Party were not just policy malpractice, but political malpractice. How do you have a policy deeply unpopular from day one, with effects that spiral out of control, that make things worse and worse, and you do nothing about it, in part because the media doesn't do its job? If the media had been saying Joe Biden seems to have a significant loss of cognitive decline, or if the media had been saying in 2022, every Democrat we talk to who represents a border state is saying privately and some publicly, this policy is not working, then perhaps there would have been change. Perhaps Joe Biden would have stepped down sooner. Perhaps fewer people would have died of drug overdoses. Perhaps Americans wouldn't be killed by people here illegally. Perhaps my friend's daughter in kindergarten in Manhattan, who sits on the ground every day in kindergarten, would have a chair because her class size wouldn't have doubled because there are kids in the country whose parents came here illegally. Perhaps Donald Trump wouldn't have won because the border would have been fixed. So you're absolutely right about the failure of the press. And I would say what's compounding it is silence. Sure, they write a story today, but the story doesn't say, editor's note, we should have written this story 3 years ago. We should have written it 2 years ago and 11 months ago. Same on the Biden cognitive decline. And people are not stupid. Even people who are not news obsessives, they're not stupid. They know that the press tried to protect Joe Biden, and they don't like it. And we've had people come on this platform for a year saying, not a year, we haven't been around for a year, for months, saying, I voted for Trump because the press is so biased. Don't like Trump, but I voted for Trump because the press is so biased. Jamie, stay there. Don't go. Others, I know everybody agrees with me. Not always, but in this case. But would anyone like to annotate, amplify, add, ask Jamie a question? The floor is...
Bothers me with this legacy media that you guys are talking about, and also the multiple parties. After 7th of October happened, NBC interviewed me. They had a guy in Israel. I went back to serve after the 7th of October. I couldn't stay in Florida and they put me on TV because I was an officer in Gaza. So I served there. I understand the territories. I understand what we're doing there. And they interviewed me, maybe 4 minutes, something like that. One of their shows, and they uploaded it to YouTube. Inside of the interview, as they were interviewing me, I knew that they were left-wing. I knew that I wasn't a good fit for them. And I brought a piece of paper. And what it showed, it was an illustration that's very famous in our country that shows an Israeli soldier standing and a baby behind the Israeli soldier, standing against Hamas, who's holding a baby in front of him, using the baby as a shield, right? This is a meme that goes around Israel. Conceptually, you guys can see it in your face?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So I put it up, and I spoke to him about it. He definitely didn't like it. They put the video of us, the interview, on their YouTube channel, and about a half hour later, they took the YouTube channel down, they took the video down, they cut the last 1 minute of the 4 or 5 minute interview to not show that, and then they put it back up. And that to me was like mind-boggling.
First of all, where are you?
I'm in Louisiana, Southwest, and I hate that you put me after the Israeli top sniper.
You'll at some point you'll be Israel's top sniper. Maybe not for 20 years, but you'll have your run. You'll have a chance at that.
Maybe if I would have been forced to do 3 years of military service, I would have learned that I was a great sniper.
Hold on 1 second, Joseph. Haley, don't take your hand off your mouth. I got to show you Haley, who's an Israeli American. Put your hand back. Haley's like breathless. Haley can't believe this episode. She's like, Israeli sniper of the year, 20 years in a row. Where's this episode been all my life? Joseph, thank you for your patience.
It's about our healthcare system or what a company or an executive does, but obviously anything like that is just atrocious and can never be tolerated. And as you say, it has raised the issue of the U.S. healthcare system and insurers. They're not perfect, but as a rule, the U.S. healthcare system is better than a lot of other places in the world. It's more innovative. than other places in the world. You know, somebody gets sick in the Middle East, a lot of those sheiks come to the United States to get better. So we're not a perfect system, long way to go, but we are a very, very good system that can always get better.
Okay, let's get some analysis here on Iran.
And crisis of legitimacy.
What lessons does the regime take from the speed with which the Assad regime fell? To me, it's another reminder to how brittle these autocratic, totalitarian regimes, however you want to characterize them. The Soviet Union wound up, for all the predictions and analysis, that it was durable and it could withstand enormous pressure. The moment there was a little bit of pressure, it all came tumbling down very quickly. The Shah in Iran, before the Islamist revolution, was thought to have a strong hold on the country. He fell very quickly. Gaddafi in Libya was viewed as untouchable. Once there was some pressure, he fell very quickly. Obviously, we know what happened to Saddam Hussein and his Ba'ath leadership in Iraq. I give example after example after example, which these leaders seem just you know, incredibly durable, and their regimes seem incredibly durable, and then they're durable until they're not. And when the not comes, it actually comes very quickly. And you blink and you're like, how did that just happen? And the reason I'm asking you this, Roz, is because I think there are two reactions that many of us are having in terms of what we think the lessons are for Iran from this Syria experience. One is, if Syria could go this quickly, if Assad could go this quickly, then what are we waiting for in Iran? The Iranian regime can fall very quickly. Anyone who tells you that the Iranian regime is so much stronger and has so much of a tighter hold on Iran, that's what we hear every time, including what we've heard in recent weeks about Assad, and then it just comes tumbling down. The other reaction is that it is actually different. Assad was much weaker. At the end of the day, Assad was not a standalone strong regime in its own right. It was just a proxy. It was just like a satellite office, if you will, of Iran's, and you can't compare the two. Which is it?
Look, you know, when I was asked, and I'm being asked for many years, do I think that there is going to be a regime change or a revolution in Iran? I tend to say, well, right now I don't think that there is an immediate threat to the stability of the regime. But if tomorrow morning I will hear that there was a revolution in Iran, I could give a very good explanation for the revolution, because all the reasons are there. We all have to wait for the trigger. I think that the Iranian regime and the Iranian opposition could learn different lessons from what is happening in Syria. They were certainly surprised, as most of us. They still try to figure out what are the lessons which have to be learned from the experience of Assad. I think that what I've been seeing in the last 2 or 3 days are different lessons learned by different elements inside Iran. So, for example, the more pragmatic, reformist elements inside Iran are saying, look, the major reason why Assad fell was because of this gap between the regime and the population. So if we have to learn one lesson from his experience, is that we have to try and close this gap between the Iranian regime and the population. There were already some reports in recent days that there are more and more criticism about this recent bill passed by the Iranian parliament to impose more sanctions on women who do not observe the hijab, the Islamic code dress. And many in Iran, including President Pezeshkian, saying, well, this is not the right time to go with this bill because it will only jeopardize even further the national unity inside Iran. But I have to say that when I heard today to Khamenei's speech, he again blamed not himself. He didn't look for any kind of consolidation with the Iranian people. He actually said, look, what happened in Syria was the result of the Zionist American conspiracy. And he said, if we want to learn one lesson from his experience, was that we have to be very aware of our enemies. We should not.
Okay, let's play a little bit here from Fox News.
That rally in the Bronx with the workers, Madison Square Garden, and now at the stock exchange. Your reaction?
Yeah, it really is truly extraordinary. The entire arc, especially of the last few months, but also of the past year and the past 4 years, for him to be where he is today, compared to, considering everything that he has been through. But what I think is really interesting, and I think just about everybody in the media, outside of maybe the three of us and a few other people, the thing that everybody missed is that the message that Donald Trump has always carried is a very centrist message with common sense solutions to real problems affecting people in their very daily lives, whether it's inflation, crime, or the open border. Obviously there were some of these other, sort of more philosophical fights, but he was running a very practical campaign. And I think that that's what broke through. And obviously he won over a lot of people who probably don't really like him that much, but they trust him and they love his policies. and they think that he has got better answers for the problems they care the most about.
Well, Molly, I think you would say Trump's stock is up, and it seems like there's no limit to how high he can go right now. But the business world, they're on board, very excited. Watch this.
We're stepping into, I would say, the most pro-growth, pro-business, pro-American administration I've perhaps seen in my my adult lifetime. Everyone is incredibly enthusiastic, really about a new administration that's about efficiency, removing the impediments to growth, deregulation.
Of course, Molly, a lot of these big business types are very anti-tariff as well, but I honestly think Trump doesn't care. He's going to do what he needs to do for the American worker.
Yeah, you know, people talk so much about how this was the best political comeback in American history for Donald Trump. And that is certainly true, obviously, with everything that they threw at him, the lawfare, the assassination attempts, everybody in the media saying that he had no chance at winning re-election. But I like to think about how much of a comeback this is for the American people. You know, you had 3 out of the last 4 presidencies were kind of failed presidencies. And when Trump was elected the first time, that was the American people saying, we are really sick of this sluggish economy, all of the problems with how we were fighting wars, nobody controlling the border. And so they do this unthinkable thing and elect Donald Trump. And then you have the regime just come down and say, oh, we're not going to let this be a normal presidency. And so when you think about everything that was done, these people sticking with Donald Trump because they do trust him, like to your point, on the economy, but also on how he handled all these other things. And so this is, I think, why people feel so good right now is because they realize how much they fought for this and how much they had to go through. And they, you know, stuck with Trump because they knew that he was someone who was listening to them, to their concerns, and he delivered on it in his first term. And so they're optimistic now.
Well, Charlie, Biden, I don't think, I mean, occasionally you'll see Biden and he'll say something and we have to cover it. But he doesn't seem so thrilled about being kind of forgotten. Watch.
Here's how Time magazine and other commentators describe the economy. I'm leaving to my successor. And there's a number of these quotes. President-elect Trump is receiving the strongest economy in modern history, which is the envy of the world.
God, his voice is worse than mine, Charlie's. Charlie, your reaction to Biden?
Well, first of all, I think your voice is great, but
Thank you.
No, it's really extraordinary. I mean, I think, you know, the guy has just completely been overshadowed, and obviously Donald Trump isn't even president yet. And it was never more dramatic than when you had the First Lady and the future president over at Notre Dame ushering in, you know, opening up the newly rebuilt cathedral, and Joe Biden is over in Angola falling asleep in some long forgotten thing talking about trains in Africa, and he's just completely lost the script. And the future and the present and everything is Donald Trump now.
Now, Molly, because you and I know what's coming in 2026, they're going to try to retake the House and try to impeach Trump again. I'm just going to say that right now. That is their plan. And we're watching them in real time try to reorganize the resistance. Watch.
We're going to be recruiting and mobilizing hundreds of thousands and millions of more people to get out there and be leaders in this fight. What else can we do? This is not a game of volleyball or badminton where we're going to, you know, quit the game or something. I mean, this is the fight of our lives that we're in now.
Molly, the fight of their lives for relevance, dominance, power. What else?
Well, they will be putting a lot into getting at least the House, if not the Senate, in 2 years, which does mean that there is a very limited period of time for Republicans to accomplish what they want. And I think that's partly why people are very frustrated that some Republicans aren't as on board as they would like to see in the Senate. But again, you think back to where we were 8 years ago when they tried to oust President Trump almost immediately. They deployed the Russia collusion hoax and 1,000 other hoaxes.
Yeah, yes. The Flynn setup, yeah.
And people didn't realize what other people were willing to do to accomplish these goals. And everyone's so much wiser now that I think it will be more difficult for Democrats and their accomplices in the media to accomplish what they did in that first term, because we're all ready for it.
All right, I want to get back to this excellent Reason documentary. We shut down state mental hospitals, but maybe it's time to reopen them and the crazy mentally ill people who are destroying the quality of life in our big cities, they need care, even if it's against their will.
Mayo believes that the legal obstacles to involuntary commitment could have cost her daughter her life. One day 5 years ago, Misty, who was 38 and has schizoaffective disorder, vanished. Mayo discovered that after collecting her $200 paycheck, she had boarded a bus to Los Angeles.
I was frantic. She was in a big city that she was unfamiliar with, and we had no family or friends there. Very little money. I thought $200, that's going to go fast. She had already been sleeping in the parks here before she left and roaming the streets. So I thought in LA, it scared me more.
Another week and a half went by. Finally, the phone rang. It was LAPD.
She was in a neighborhood and sitting on a cliff, and the neighbors were concerned about her.
In Mayo's view, Misty posed a threat not only to herself, but to others as well. Mayo later found out that during the time she was missing, Misty had been arrested in a shopping mall.
I can't tell you what was going through her head, but she was trying to take a baby out of a baby carriage. And the mother said no, and Misty didn't heed that. So she was arrested.
For years, Misty had been refusing therapy and medication. After her arrest, the state had legal grounds for forcing her to comply with treatment. Linda believes this saved Misty's life.
I was very happy that she was being allowed to be in the hospital for a longer period of time that would require some stabilization.
Laura's Law, in her view, creates a legal path to giving seriously mentally ill patients like Misty the help they need before they pose a danger to themselves or others.
This is one step saying, okay, we want to catch you in a court order before it's a crime, before it's a hospitalization, before it's homelessness.
But some mental health advocates say that Laura's Law and similar bills violate the rights of even seriously mentally ill patients.
There's a big perception in my community that once they get their...
But Krzyzanowski says that mental health professionals and reformers often abuse the concept of too sick to know you're sick to violate the rights of the mentally ill.
It's a way of saying, I don't have to listen to you, or more to the point, you're now voiceless.
The whole involuntary treatment is a hard balance. No one wants involuntary. All the advocates that I've talked to, this is the last thing that we want. But there are cases that require it.
And Krzyzanowski says that even though the state institutions are gone, to this day, many psychiatric patients are locked in facilities for weeks or even months at a time under court orders giving legal power over financial and healthcare decisions to a third party under an arrangement called conservatorship.
The most difficult calls we would get, especially during anybody's holiday season, would be people who are on conservatorship, were locked away somewhere. They were able to get a phone call, and you just felt like you were talking to one person alone, like they'd been locked away in a dungeon and hadn't seen the light for like months.
Another problem with the idea of bringing back state mental hospitals is that in the current system, commitment often exacerbates symptoms. A study published in the medical journal Psychiatric Services found that alarmingly high numbers of patients admitted to one state-run mental health system witnessed traumatic events, were secluded or restrained, and even suffered physical assault.
We can change the whole historic dynamic of the use of coercion in people with serious mental illnesses.
Psychiatrist Scott Zeller is the founder of the Alameda Model, a movement dedicated to reforming how mental health institutions operate. It focuses on getting psychiatric patients out of hospital emergency rooms as quickly as possible and into dedicated mental facilities that respect their right to personal space and freedom, even if they've been involuntarily committed.
Typically, if you're in a psychiatric emergency, you're very paranoid, or you're very frightened, or you're very despondent, or you're very anxious. And imagine going into the general ER with those kind of symptoms and basically being put into a small space and said, you're going to have to stay here and you can't move. And people tend to get worse in ERs.
The Providence Medical Center in San Pedro, California, which uses Zeller's approach, is a standalone building just down the road from a hospital. Unlike in hospitals, which are often lacking in on-call psychiatrists, staff are able to medicate and stabilize patients around the clock, sometimes through the use of telepsychiatry if a doctor isn't on site, with the goal of discharging them for outpatient treatment within the first 24 hours of admission.
People can
Well, some of them, you don't want them discharged.
Seriously supporting it. But rather than supporting these things which really can help the seriously mentally ill, we mislead officials into supporting programs and supporting efforts that really don't have an impact. One of our most popular claims, if we intervene early, we can prevent mental illness. And everyone in the industry spouts this. Nonsense. We know that schizophrenia and bipolar disorder, two of the major serious mental illnesses, cannot be prevented. In fact, we'll know when it can be prevented because surely there will be a Nobel Prize to whoever figures it out.
Right, there's nothing you can do. There's no way you can intervene to prevent serious mental illness.
Now, it is true we can prevent progression of illness, but that means treating people who have it, not people who don't. We mislead about risk factors. We wrap everything that makes you sad in a mental health narrative, whether it's poverty, bad grades, unemployment, angst about sexual identity. These are all now mental illness conditions or they're risk factors for mental illness. If we start spending our money on all these things that make people sad, what's left for the seriously ill? And because we mislead about what constitutes a mental illness, we mislead about treatment. Anything that makes you happier is now a treatment. Now, don't laugh at my dog. I love my dog. Being around my dog makes me happier. But that does not mean my dog is a therapy dog or that every dog is a therapy dog. Mindfulness, meditation, yoga, dancing, art are all now therapies to treat mental illness. And when we start diverting our funds to all those efforts, what's left for people with serious mental illness? As a matter of fact, we won't even say mental illness anymore. Some of the very major advocacy groups now require us to say mental health condition. Mental health condition. To me, a mental health condition is what somebody who doesn't have mental illness have. They have a mental health condition. I want that. Now, I'm going to ask a question. I'm going to ask, if you can, to raise your hands and keep it up. Okay. How many of you have ever known someone who died? You lost a friend, a parent, a sibling. How many of you, anybody here ever keep your hands up, we're in the military. Anybody ever had an abusive parent or partner? Keep your hands up. Anyone ever lived, like I did, in a poverty area or a crime-ridden area? Has anyone ever witnessed violence or had an accident or was divorced and one parent? So many of you raised your hand. You can now claim you have trauma. And in the mental health industry, trauma has become the explanation and the justification for everything that happens to you for the rest of your life. He had trauma. Nonsense. Let me say very clearly, trauma.
He's right here. Right. This has become the dominant magic key to mental health, is uncovering the effects of trauma and everything boiling down to trauma. Big trend over the past 8 years.
As you can tell by people who raise your hand, is not a mental illness. PTSD is, and even that can run from mild to severe. But if we're going to divert mental health funds to solving all trauma in the world, what's left for the seriously mentally ill? We mislead about peer support. Now, a lot of people who I respect immensely say peer support is terrific. Let me just say, that's, as I wrote in Psychiatric News, it's not what the research shows. The research on peer support is done by adding peer support to what people normally get. But they don't compare that to adding a professional social worker to what people get. They research adding peer support to adding nothing. Would outcomes be better if we added professionals rather than peers? I can't tell you how many professionals come up to me and say that they believe that adding peer support is being done at the sacrifice of quality to lower costs, but they're afraid to speak up. Don't be afraid. Speak up. Be a leader, not a misleader. And we mislead about kids. I don't know how many of you saw this headline. More U.S. children diagnosed with youthful tendency disorder. Now, it's true, it's from The Onion. But it could have been from this conference. One of our most popular claims One of our most popular claims, half of all mental illness begins before age 14. Again, the claim is technically true, but most of those are mild illnesses, and they don't become serious mental illnesses. Serious mental illnesses generally appear in the late teens, early 20s. They are not predictable, and they are not preventable. But when we start throwing money at kids who don't sit at the exact right place on our bell curve, we're diverting money from kids who really do have a serious emotional disturbance. We mislead about evidence. All of us claim our programs are evidence-based, and we all keep touting this word evidence-based. As James Coynes wrote, evidence-based is too often an ill-gotten branding based on weak evidence generated by the promoters of the treatments who want us to ignore their conflicts of interest. Now, to be evidence-based, a program should meet 3 criteria. It should have evidence that's independent. It should improve a meaningful metric like homelessness, arrest, incarceration, suicide, needless hospitalization, and it should do that in the target population. Yet we claim our suicide programs are a success based on the number of calls to a suicide helpline, not whether suicides are going up or down, and by the way, they're going up. We declare our outreach programs a success by measuring the number of contacts, not whether anyone got treatment. We declare our education programs a success by whether people who receive the education feel more or less educated, not whether on any mentally ill got treatment. Now, this picture often makes people smile. And so all I have to do is tabulate how many people smiled when they saw the picture. And I've got myself an evidence-based program proven to improve mental health. It's called dog costume exposure therapy. No mental illness, no serious mental illness is needed. And I'm glad we're all having a good time, but this is true. This is what's happening to the seriously mentally ill. We're being shunned and shut out of the engagement. And that brings me to the biggest fail of all, stigma. We keep teaching officials that stigma is the biggest barrier to care. Nonsense. Any mom of somebody with serious mental illness, any social worker who works in this room knows that the biggest barriers to care is there's no services available. There's no hospitals to refer to, there's no programs to refer to, there's no clubhouses, there's no place to refer to. And the CEOs in this room knows that there's not getting paid enough Medicaid funds, so they can't hire the best staff or build the facilities. There's no transportation options. The cost is too high. The person has anosognosia. They don't know they're ill. All these are far bigger barriers to care than stigma, but we go out there and we teach the governor and the mayor, oh, you gotta fight stigma, you gotta fight stigma, and we applaud them when they're fighting stigma. At the same time, they're cutting our programs. Our stigma campaigns, I believe, are harmful. They actually hurt. We won't show a psychotic, delusional person in our public service, our public awareness activities. We show high-functioning executives, and then we claim that everyone can recover. That's not an education campaign. That is a propaganda campaign. There are people who are seriously mentally ill, and we have to stop shunning them. And let me say this. Our stigma campaigns, I used to be in advertising, they are ineffective. They will never, ever work. No stigma campaign of ours is going to trump the visual of 17 dead students at Parkland, Florida, or dead people at the Waffle House just recently. As a matter of fact, Parkland is a great example of how off-base we are. We argue that we shouldn't take guns away from the mentally ill because that would cause stigma, and they're no more violent than others. So as a result of that policy, we sent trauma workers to Parkland to help students get over the trauma of being shot by somebody we claim is no more violent than others. That's ludicrous. In the aftermath of these incidents, we should do what the students did. They went to Tallahassee to urge the governor to take guns away from the seriously mentally ill. That will do far more to reduce stigma, far more to reduce trauma, and far more to reduce dead people than arguing the mentally ill are no more violent than others, and it will cause stigma to take their guns away. Stigma has become the black hole of our advocacy. We're diverting tens of thousands of advocates from fighting for the real changes that are needed to this amorphous thing called stigma, this unmeasurable thing called stigma. And it's causing great harm to many, many people. So next month is Mental Health Awareness Month. I beg you, Don't use that to teach the public that there is stigma and that you're against it. Use it to teach the public that we need more housing, we need more rehab programs, we need AOT, easier access to civil commitment, we need better Medicaid rates, we need ACT and ICM teams that are true to the model. We need to get the people who work in this room lower caseloads and livable salaries. That's what will improve care for the seriously mentally ill.
All right, this is DJ Jaffe, an author. He died in 2020. And the Manhattan Institute put on a program where people reflected on his legacy.
To thank me for stating what was obvious, that individuals with serious mental illness deserve access to high quality, ethically administered intensive care, just as anyone with a serious medical condition would receive. His first email came to me during the week after a controversial paper I wrote was published. I was receiving actual hate mail, and it was the first time I corresponded with DJ.
Come on, man.
And
I'm
at
trying
the
to run a
time,
show here.
It was very impressive. Thought he was a really eccentric character. I would come to learn that actually his eccentricity was actually electricity in the way he advocated for his cause. So you see, I was actually a very kind of green and relatively new bioethics professor at Penn, and I was on the scene of what I thought was an obvious and the way individuals with serious mental illnesses have been treated in this country represents a moral and ethical blight. Money is being spent, research is being conducted, but we're doing only slightly better than in the 1980s when individuals with mental illnesses resided in ramshackle state-run facilities. And in fact, we've regressed back to a period of imprisoning mental.
And pushing the agenda that he believed would help the serious mentally ill was that prize. You know, from the time I met him in 2006, he was always advocating for those he considered the sickest of the sick. You know, my father was a minister, and I grew up listening to missionaries and the Bible, and DJ reminded me, when I thought about him with his ponytail and his, as he said, eccentric type personality, as kind of being a modern day mental health John the Baptist. He was absolutely certain that his ideas were what were needed to help others, save lives, and he talked about them incessantly, every opportunity he had. He had no use, as we just heard, for the status quo, and he was very impatient with those who kept that status quo. He's been described as the garden party, and I think DJ would have really enjoyed both of those terms. He was much more comfortable on the outside, knocking on the door. He started his advocacy, like most of us did, with the National Alliance on Mental Illness, but he soon grew impatient with NAMI because he perceived it as straying away from its cause, its roots of parents and serious mental illness. And in fact, this is why DJ was such a bomb thrower. In 2017, he launched an effort to actually change the entire board at NAMI by flooding policy books. Well, I was wrong. He got a major publisher to publish his book, and he started being called on more and more because of his research and what he had to say. He was instrumental in helping Representative Tim Murphy pass the Helping Families in Crisis Act. He was instrumental in getting Dr. McCann's CATS approved as the first Assistant Secretary of Mental Health and Substance Abuse. He was invited to the White House. He was invited to give a TED Talk, and much to his shock, he was invited to speak at the National Council on Behavioral Health, which is the largest.
Okay, he's got a great book out on how we are not taking care of our most severe cases of mental illness. Instead, the people with the least need for mental health care are getting the most, and the people with the most need for mental health care are getting the least. And he published an important book in 2017, Insane Consequences: How the Mental Health Industry